The young man ran through the city as fast as he could, not even imagining that every step brought him closer to an extraordinary adventure. Zhu Yingguo was rushing to a familiar store. A very popular game he loved had just come out today. His parents gave him this name in the hope that he would become a leading character in this world. And although Zhu was often ridiculed, he really wanted to become the main character. The young man ran into the store. Zhu asked a salesman he knew if he had the game, and he replied with a smile that he had saved one copy especially for him. It was a remake of the famous game Saga of the Night. The new part was called Saga of the Night Resurrection. The story takes place in a world where there are two opposing races, humans and demons. The player must choose one of two characters, the first of which is the human knight Loka. The second character is a hero of the opposite race, the second son of the demon lord, Zephyr Ragnaros. Each character can travel around the game world, develop, and achieve different goals. Zhu had played through the Knight's Saga more than 10 times, so he knew everything from the characters to the locations of items and events. Moreover, this is the first game that can be played in virtual reality, literally finding yourself inside the world. The satisfied young man returned home and immediately went to his room. He was eager to immerse himself in the new game. He took out a gaming chip for the virtual reality headset from the kit of his favorite game he had just bought. Zhu quickly put on the virtual reality helmet. This would be his first experience playing the game in this way. He pressed the lock on the device with the chip, and the game began to download into the helmet and the computer connected to it. The young man settled comfortably in his gaming chair, waiting for the game world to fully load. He decided that today he would play for about 8 hours, no more, and then return to the real world. The player smiled. A strange sensation overcame him, as if his body was being transported somewhere to another dimension. Looking up, Zhu saw light pouring from a hole in the ceiling. He asked if he was already in the game. He remembered that according to the description, the game really begins when you wake up in bed. But this is very strange. The young man didn't even have time to choose a character for himself. This is an unusual course of the game. Zhu looked at himself. He couldn't understand who this character was that he was about to play as now. Suddenly, the young man heard someone ask him if he was still sleeping. It was high time to get up. An orc looked into the tent where the hero Zhu was and told him to get up quickly. Didn't he know that they had things to do in the morning? The young man exclaimed with delight. The graphics were simply insane, just like in reality. The orc who entered asked in confusion, "What kind of graphics?" Zhu was stunned. Could he really communicate with the game's characters? This definitely wasn't in the advert. It was just awesome. The young man carefully asked the orc his name. He sighed. What was he talking about? Had he already forgotten that he was Karak? Heading towards the exit, the orc said that everyone was waiting for Prince Shutra, so the young man needed to leave quickly. Zhu understood. So now he is the 9th son of the demon king Shutra Ignus. But why is he playing as him? He waved his hand. The developers said that this way you can open the status window in the game. Indeed, at that very second, a window of his hero with all his characteristics appeared in front of the young man. The player was surprised. Ordinary NPCs usually have stats of 10, but for some reason the prince has 5. I wonder why that is. Apparently, you need to play as this particular hero in your first playthrough. But okay. You need to see what skills are available to him. The young man smiled. His conquest and protagonist bonus skills. Could it really be that bonus that Zhu was thinking about that was working here? Karak looked into the tent again and urged the prince. Everyone had gathered and was waiting for him. The young demon prince Shutra Ignus cautiously walked out of the tent following Karak. Looking around, Zhu was surprised at what was happening here. This was definitely not in the game's plot. Right in front of the tent stood an armed army of orcs, as if awaiting orders from the son of the demon king. The young man asked Karak what had happened here, as if a war had started. But he barked that he had enough of his nonsense and suggested that they go. The orc leader added that they needed to deal with the freaks from the Red Lightning tribe, and Zhu was shocked. Karak smiled. This was the first outing of the 14-year-old prince, Zhu asked in confusion. It was already a campaign, but what about training? That is, according to the plot, the orcs from the Red Lightning tribe killed the warriors of the demonic army and raised a rebellion. And now Shatura, together with the 7th prince and the 8th princess, must suppress this rebellion. The guy was riding through the forest with a small squad of orcs and was wondering what tactics he should choose in this situation. He asked why they had only taken 10 to the battle, but Karak reminded them that they were only going on reconnaissance. They didn't need many people. The chieftain asked the prince if he had eaten something bad yesterday and was acting strange today, not like himself. Zhu waved his hand, and a map of the location appeared in front of him. He saw their small detachment moving through the forest. This minimap makes it easy to find your way, and the player decided to leave it on just in case. And then the guy saw that there was a hidden path indicated on the map. Perhaps a game event was waiting for him there. Karak carefully examined the main map, trying to figure out where to turn, but it was a long way to go along the main road. Turning off the main road, Shutra Ignis told Karak to follow him. He knew the way much faster. A squad of orcs, quietly talking among themselves, followed the young son of the demon king, Shutra. Quickly passing through the forest thickets, the orc scouts soon found themselves near the mountain range. Now they had to cross the pass to reach the rebel territory. Ju was drenched in sweat. His hero was initially rather weak for such expeditions and adventures. Having overcome the obstacles, Karak's squad found themselves near a stone gate that none of them had known about before. The orcs looked in surprise at the stone doors in the rock. It was some kind of ancient secret structure. Karak asked the prince in surprise how he knew about such a road. Was he by any chance a magician? But Ju grumbled, "What kind of magician is he?" The leader asked solicitously if everything was all right with Shutra. He looked exhausted, but the hero Ju's stamina was lousy. But he cheerfully answered Karak not to pay attention. They needed to see if the stone door to the cave would open. Suddenly Ju felt as if his body was on fire, and he began to fill with energy and strength. The young man could not understand what was happening to his hero, whether it was good or bad and what caused it. And then a game window appeared in front of him with a message that his level had increased. Ju couldn't believe it. This couldn't be. He just walked around and already leveled up. Very strange. Looking at the status window, he saw that his stats had increased by 2, and he also received a level bonus. While the young man was figuring out his level, the Karak orcs broke down the stone gates, and the way was clear. Karak asked the prince why he was there, suggesting that they go to the cave faster. The guy replied that he was already on his way. Ju didn't know what was inside the cave, but since he wasn't alone, it was definitely worth a look. And most importantly, with the main character's bonus, even if he falls off a cliff, he will always receive luck instead of wounds. In front of the squad there was a wide tunnel. It looked like it had been dug by the dwarves who had lived in these lands long ago. The young man was surprised. He was sure that there were no gnomes in the demonic lands. Maybe they had moved away. And suddenly the orcs saw that right in front of them was a treasury with gold and outlandish weapons. The orcs were delighted. This is a treasure trove. Those stupid gnomes running away seemed to have abandoned all their weapons. While the warriors were collecting everything they had found, the prince looked thoughtfully at the valuable finds that glittered before him. Whatever he settled on, he couldn't wield the item due to insufficient strength or mana. The young man spat in irritation, then decided to take the items just in case. He still needed to figure out how to put them in his inventory. Touching the weapon he had chosen, Ju mentally commanded the game to place it in his inventory. It worked. So if you touch it and think about putting it down, the item will go into your inventory. Great. The young man was carried away by the treasure he had found, and completely failed to notice that an enemy detachment was approaching them. Looking at the minimap open in front of him, Ju saw that the enemies were very close and were about to attack. Prince Shutra shouted loudly to the orc warriors to retreat immediately, and they were very surprised. They looked at the prince in surprise when the stone wall in front of them began to crack. Someone was breaking through to the squad. There was a deafening explosion, and the tunnel wall shattered, scattering Karak's warriors in all directions. In the breach in the wall stood a squad of rebellious orcs from the Red Lightning tribe. Their leader, Kaichan, asked with a grin if they really thought their arrival here would go unnoticed. Kaichan ordered his warriors to surround and kill all the orcs of Karak, sparing no one. A bloody battle began. The scout detachment led by Karak was very small, and they were soon surrounded. But the Demon King's orcs were much stronger than the rebels. They fought steadfastly, and blood flowed like a river. The little prince found himself on the sidelines of the battle. He took out his sword and wondered what he should do. The young man thought that maybe he should finish off some wounded enemy to get combat experience points. He quietly approached from behind the Red Lightning orc that the Karaka warrior was fighting. The prince jumped up and struck the red orc in the back with his small sword. But, to Ju's surprise, the sword did not cause any harm to the enemy. Moreover, it broke, and now instead of a weapon, he had only a fragment in his hands. The enraged red orc turned to the hapless demon prince and growled menacingly. Shutra ran away with a scream from the formidable warrior of Red Lightning, because he had nothing to defend himself with. Suddenly, the young man caught his foot on a stone that lay in his path. The Demon King's son gasped and fell helplessly to the floor of the cave, right in front of the red orc who was chasing him. A game window opened in front of Ju's face, and the system informed him that he had almost no life left. At this time, the fallen Prince Shutra was overtaken with an angry growl by the red orc he was trying to kill. The young man screamed desperately, strangely, but Ju physically felt the threat approaching him. Suddenly, the mighty Karak stood between the prince and the red orc attacking him. He shouted to the confused Prince Shutra to quickly run away from the battle and return to the camp. Two mighty orcs crossed swords, and the boy looked at the bloody carnage in confusion. Ju looked at his hands in surprise. They were still shaking. But why? It's just a game. The young man decided to quit the game. That was enough for today. Everything was too realistic. It was even scary to continue. He called up the game window and clicked on the button to open the game's main menu. His hero's window appeared in front of him. And only now did Ju notice that the menu of this game was not quite ordinary. It was different from the one in the previous game. The young man frantically ran his eyes over the menu, secretly hoping that he had missed something. The player broke out in a sweat as he couldn't find the exit button. Was he really stuck here now, in this fairy tale game world, in the body of a 14-year-old demon prince? Suddenly, the young man saw that the leader of the Red Orcs, Kai-chan, was heading straight towards him. The orc rebel's eyes blazed with anger. He was clearly about to kill the son of his sworn enemy, the Demon King. Kai-chan swung his staff at Shutra, the unarmed prince looking so defenseless. Ju froze in place in fear, his mouth open. He looked in confusion at the enemy approaching him. The player clenched his teeth. No, this can't be. He can't die here. There has to be a way out. Suddenly, the prince felt terrible pain. Tears gushed from his eyes. The magical charges sent by Kai-chan reached him. Caught up in a magical whirlwind, the lightweight Shutra Ignis crashed into the stone wall of the cave with a roar. Ju groaned in pain, his vision blurred, his body covered in wounds. Was he really dying? Losing consciousness, the young man saw the muscular leader of the orc tribe, Red Lightning, running towards him. But Kai-chan was in for a surprise when he ran up to the prince. An unknown force carried the young man out of the cave. The young man found himself in some strange space, similar to outer space. It was dark around and there was no one. He turned his head from side to side, wondering where he was, and sure enough, the orc seemed to have killed him. Ju clenched his teeth. Did he really die and end up in the afterlife? No, that was nonsense. That couldn't be. Suddenly, a bright golden light appeared ahead. Very similar to the sun, someone was approaching. The young man heard a pleasant female voice. The girl said that Shutra was the chosen one of these lands. The golden-haired beauty extended her hand to him and said, "A prince must conquer and subdue in order to rule." Ju's mouth opened in surprise. Who was this? He didn't remember such a character in the game, and what did this all mean? The girl disappeared like a vision, leaving only a golden glow, which now surrounded the young prince. Meanwhile, a bloody battle continued in the dwarf tunnel. None of the orcs were going to surrender. Although Karak's warriors were strong, the red orcs were superior in numbers, and they pressed their enemies from all sides. Kai-chan returned to his warriors. It was time to finish the fight and get out before reinforcements arrived at Karak. The leader of the red orcs snorted. The enemies came here in such a pitiful bunch, either bad or stupid. Prince Shutra found himself in the dwarven tunnel again, and heard Kai-chan's order to kill everyone. Ju said in confusion what had just happened to him. Was it really an awakening? Kai-chan turned to the prince in surprise. The red orc leader stuttered and asked how the boy could come back to life, since he was definitely dead. A game screen appeared in front of the young man, and the system informed him that he had acquired the first-level telekinesis skill. The player was surprised when he managed to master telekinesis, if he hadn't even studied it. Suddenly he saw something unexpected in his characteristics window. He had an additional profession, Knight of Conquest. Meanwhile, Kai-chan came to his senses and shouted to the warriors to immediately kill Prince Shutra. Karak couldn't believe his eyes. Surprisingly, the prince was still alive, even though he had seen with his own eyes how Kai-chan killed him. Karak shouted to his warriors to protect the prince. The son of the Demon King must not be harmed. Ju still clutched the broken piece of his sword in his hand and tried to collect his thoughts. He turned back to the game screen. Everything that happened in the game had its own meaning, but he couldn't grasp what it was. What kind of profession is a Knight of Conquest? There was definitely no such profession in the Knight's saga, and why did he have one now? Suddenly he slammed his fist on the cave floor and a golden light spread around, just like the one that had surrounded Ju recently. It was as if he had always known the words of the spell. They were spinning in his head, and now he mechanically pronounced them. "The power of conquest is the power of the king," the prince loudly shouted to the warriors to fight under the king's banner. At that very moment, golden energy engulfed the warriors of Karak, giving them new, unprecedented strength. Karak's orc scouts exclaimed in surprise that they felt a surge of power. It literally overwhelmed them. The leader roared that all these red rebels had to be swept to hell. The orcs rushed into battle, killing their enemies left and right, sometimes with their bare hands. Kai-chan's subordinates wavered. They did not understand what had happened to their opponents, where they suddenly got their strength from. and Karak's warriors were literally blazing with energy. And soon there were almost no living orcs of the Red Lightning tribe left in the tunnel. Kai-chan looked at what was happening in confusion. What the hell was this? Why did his enemies suddenly become so strong? What kind of nonsense is this? This can't be happening. Just a few minutes ago they were almost in despair, and suddenly the leader of the Red Lightning saw the recently revived Prince Shutra, with a bright golden light streaming around him. Kai-chan asked in surprise if the advantage in the battle was really due to this boy. The Red Orc chieftain shouted at Prince Shutra to stop immediately and direct a hail of stones in his direction. Ju frowned. He knew that this opponent was definitely beyond his capabilities right now. Suddenly, the mighty Karak stood between him and Kai-chan and cut the flying stones with his sword. The young man tried to strengthen his defender as much as possible with the help of skill. He shouted to Karak to go forward, and the mighty warrior flew at the enemy with lightning speed. Karak had never felt such power within himself before. It seemed that now he could defeat an entire army on his own. Kai-chan waited for the enemy with a smile, confident that he could deal with any fighter. And suddenly the leader of the Red Orcs wavered. Confusion flashed in his eyes. He could not stop Karak. The sword flashed, and Karak, without even stopping, cut off the head of the leader of the Red Lightning Orcs. The rest of Kai-chan's squad watched in surprise as their leader's head rolled across the stone floor. The few remaining Red Orcs ran away screaming. The battle was won. A strange message appeared on the golden game screen. The merit of the commanders for the glory of his king. After successfully completing the battle in the Dwarven Tunnel, Prince Shutra's level was increased 3 times. Ju was very happy. But he didn't understand why the level had increased, since he hadn't taken part in the battle. Karak looked in surprise at his hand, on which there were still reflections of energy. He could not understand what kind of power it was. The old warrior was amazed that with this power, his small detachment easily defeated the enemies. He turned towards Prince Shutra. The Demon King's son was for some reason pointing his finger at the air. Karak was perplexed as to whether it was the prince who had endowed them with such unprecedented power. But how had he managed to do so? The detachment returned to its camp. The soldiers had dinner, posted sentries, and the rest went to rest. Ju went into the prince's tent and continued searching for the exit button, but it had definitely disappeared from the menu and wasn't on any other screens either. The young man told himself that he needed to calm down. There were 2 possible options. The first was that he was stuck in virtual reality. Perhaps there was some critical failure in the system. Then perhaps an update will resolve it. The second option sounds crazy, but it is possible that the place he found himself in is not a game, but reality. Just like in manhwas and novels, Ju was trapped inside a game or a world similar to a game. In this case, the environment can only be called real, the game's heroes, with whom you can talk, as if they were alive. And most importantly, there is no pixelation here. Everything is as it should be in reality. But if this really is another world, what should I do? Could Ju really die here? No. The young man is not ready for such an adventure. At least he is not an orc or an ogre. For now, he is a prince. Suddenly Karak looked into the prince's tent and asked if Shutra had a free minute. The Demon King's son asked the old warrior what happened, and he silently looked at the young lord. Karak invited the prince to stretch his legs before bed and have a little practice sword fight. Ju was displeased, but Karak wanted to know how his commander and master wielded a sword. The orc threw Shutra a small sword. He needed to show him the level of his fencing. Seeing the fear on the young man's face, Karak grinned and said that he would try to be gentler. The young man laughed. What a mood. The leader did not forget what he had just said to the demon prince. The prince exclaimed that if he was going to fight, he would do it properly, and he rushed at the orc with his sword. Karak took out a small training sword and also rushed forward to meet the young demon. Ju struck with his sword. The warrior was taken aback. The prince's blow was so weak that it didn't even scratch the orc. Shutra poked Karak, who was standing in front of him, with his sword, and he looked questioningly at the ruler, asking what had happened to him. The chieftain frowned. The prince's blows sounded like the weak impact of small pebbles on a rock. Karak struck with his sword. The young man flew to the side with a cry and fell. The chieftain asked if everything was all right with the ruler, and he, rubbing the bruised place, asked why he had to hit him so hard. Suddenly, a message from the game appeared in front of Ju. He received a new skill. Now he has basic fencing. The young man looked at the screen in bewilderment. When did he manage to master fencing? And then it dawned on him. This was very similar to that incident with telekinesis in the tunnel. It turns out that if Prince Shutra gets his fill, he learns a new skill. Ju took up his sword again and told Karak that when they finished the duel, they would go and eat, since they weren't finished yet. Surprised, Karak saw that the prince had taken a fighting stance and was preparing for a duel. There was a smile on the young man's face, and he said that, by the way, He was just warming up. Clutching his sword, Prince Shutra rushed at his huge and powerful opponent. Karak blocked the young gentleman's blow, but the boy continued to attack. The old warrior was surprised. The young man's movements had definitely improved significantly. But then why didn't he do this at the beginning? It can't be that his skills suddenly improved so dramatically. Karak swung his sword, but the young prince skillfully dodged the orc's attack. Shutra prepared to rush into battle again, his eyes sparkling. He was delighted with his new skill. He asked the orc chieftain with a smile how he was still coping with the training duel. The young man asked Karak what level he was. The warrior replied that the last time he checked, he was 21st. Ju looked at his stats again, which meant Karak was 21, which was good. Prince Shutra was now at level 7, and the young man was confident that he would soon catch up with his teacher. In this world, everyone has levels, but characters can't check them in the status window. They need to use level measurement magic. So being able to learn stats and improve abilities as you level up is a huge advantage. The prince pushed off the ground and again rushed at Karak with his sword. The lesson was giving him genuine pleasure. The orc commander never ceased to be amazed. His little master was improving his skills before his eyes. Ju smiled contentedly. He realized that in this world he could become stronger and stronger. Not even that, he has a unique chance to break far ahead. From the description, Ju knew what was going to happen in the demon route of the Night Resurrection saga. There, the main character, Zephyr, defeats his brothers and becomes the Lord of Demons. There are many episodes before the finale, but the most important one is the forced event of the Day of the Massacre. This event takes place in the 517th year of the magical era, when Zephyr kills all of his brothers for the royal crown. This means Shutra is among them. Now in the demonic world it is the year 512. There is still time before the Day of the Massacre. We need to come up with something and stop this nightmare. The best thing would be to become stronger than Zephyr, but it's difficult. And then Karak called out to the prince. He asked what the young man was doing here. They were looking for him everywhere. Did Shutra forget that an important event was scheduled for today? A meeting was to take place. Karak excitedly urged the prince to go faster. Everyone was already waiting for him. They returned to the military camp again and hurried to the main tent where the guests were waiting. Ju looked at his older brother and sister sitting opposite him in confusion. The prince and princess were drinking tea, and the young man, stuttering, remarked that they had arrived a bit early. The seventh prince, Chris Moonlight, was surprised that Shutra had switched to you. They were brothers after all. Eighth Princess Caitlin Moonlight told Chris it wasn't surprising. It was their first time meeting in person. But Chris suggested to his younger brother to drop the ceremony and simply call them by their first names. These two are the children of the fourth lycanthrope queen, Elaine Moonlight. And even in the original game these two were infuriating during battles. However, according to the script, Chris and Caitlin die a year before the Day of the Massacre. In the game, the brother and sister must die at the hands of their older brother Zephyr and the children of the Demon Lord. The reason for the murder is that Caitlin Moonlight is hiding the secret of her birth. In fact, she is not the daughter of a demon lord, but the illegitimate child of a lycanthrope queen. Caitlin asked Shutra why he didn't act according to plan and started fighting, when he was simply tasked with reconnaissance. The young man answered sheepishly, "Well, they started fighting. What else could they do? They had to fight." The sister asked him solicitously if his little brother had been injured in the battle. Looking at Shutra, the girl grumbled, the weakest of the brothers, and no caution at all. Ju didn't understand why they were worried about him. Did the Demon Lord's children really get along so well? Chris frowned and said that if the kid got into trouble again, he would get his head kicked. Prince Shutra looked at his relatives with doubt, wondering if they were too kind. And then he remembered that lycanthropes, thanks to their excess life force, have many aura owners. If Ju uses the same method he used to obtain the previous two skills, then the aura can be easily obtained as well. Shutra turned to his brother and sister and said that he had a request for them. Chris asked in surprise what he needed. Suddenly, the young man asked Caitlin if she could hit him with aura. The girl's face lengthened. She knew that this was very dangerous, especially since Shutra was very weak. Chris was confused. The kid had apparently gone completely crazy. How could he ask them about this? In the mountain valley, lights were flashing here and there. A bloody battle was going on there. The Red Lightning Tribe orcs fiercely resisted the Demon King's army. The combined forces of the Demon Lord's children brutally suppressed the rebellion that arose in his lands. The giant ogre terrified the rebels with its strength and incredible cruelty. Knowing that they would be shown no mercy, the rebel troops fought to the death. Indeed, the army of the Demon Lord's children did not spare any of the rebels. However, there were still some brave souls who dared to attack even the commander of the army. But it was not easy to even wound him, let alone kill him. This warrior was too powerful. He only glanced at the daredevil who had attempted to kill him, and all the rebels' courage disappeared. The blow of this ogre's axe was too much for the enemies to withstand. The very ground cracked underfoot. The commander ordered that none of the rebels should be allowed to escape, that they should all be killed, and that the one who killed the most would receive a reward. Inspired, the king's orcs rushed into battle with renewed vigor against the Red Lightning tribe. Soon the entire valley was littered with corpses and covered in blood, and the uprising was completely suppressed. Ju found himself in a strange empty space again. It seemed like he died again, but he himself did not understand how. He was met again by the golden-haired beauty. The girl recognized the prince. He was definitely already here. But now, in addition to Goldilocks, other unusual figures have appeared here. Ju asked who they were. There were definitely no such characters in the Night Saga. The girl quietly approached Prince Shutra and enveloped him in golden light. The young man turned to the unusual beauty. He could not understand where he was and what kind of characters these were. Suddenly the light became unbearably bright, and the player could no longer see those who were near him. Ju opened his eyes. He was again lying on the bed in the tent of Prince Shutra Ignis. Sitting up in bed, the young man rubbed his forehead in confusion, wondering if he was really sleeping inside the game. Karak asked the prince with concern. He had already woken up. The young man cried out in surprise. He cursed and said that the leader had scared him. Karak sighed with relief. It seemed that the prince was okay. The orc asked Shutra why he asked the princess to hit him. She didn't want to hit him, but the prince begged him. And now, looking at the young prince, Karak was stunned. Streams of aura flowed around the boy. Ju saw the game message. He received the aura skill. The young man was delighted. He felt the aura. How great. Karak was surprised. Could it really be that if you get hit by an aura, you can awaken your aura? The prince replied. You could say that. The warrior asked where that surge of power when they fought with Red Lightning came from. The prince replied that he did it. Ju asked if nothing happened while he was sleeping. Karak replied, of course it did. At the main camp, they also won a victory over the Red Lightning tribe. Ju was surprised. Weren't the three of them the ones who came to pacify the tribe? Karak chuckled. Red Lightning is a strong tribe. Of course there were more people there. The young man then asked who commanded the main forces, and it turned out to be General Bandel, an ogre who was worth 100. Ju knew this hero very well. He was one of the real monsters in terms of strength and appearance. Bandel was Ju's favorite subordinate when he played as Zephyr. Maybe now is the chance to change that. The general becomes Zephyr's subordinate in the 515th year of the magical era, while he is not yet subordinate to him. This means that Shutra can be the first to make the powerful general his subordinate. Ju knows almost everything about Bandel, what gifts he likes, what he likes to eat, what his specialty is. And the most important condition for attracting Bandel is to defeat him in a one-on-one duel. Knowing this much information, Ju will be able to make Bandel his subordinate before Zephyr. It's worth a try, the young man smiled. Well, Bandel will definitely become his subordinate. After recovering from the aura attack, Prince Shutra Ignis headed to Caitlyn's camp. Chris was shocked. His younger brother reached the first level of aura all in one day. How is this even possible? Ju smiled. Of course he achieved it. He put all his points into his aura. It wasn't a hasty decision. The aura improves all abilities. It's even better than telekinesis. Chris continued to repeat in confusion that it was impossible. Maybe it was because Shutra was a Gandharva. The elder brother asked Shutra if he could create underground maps. Ju chuckled to himself. He had a mini-map. He asked his brother for a pencil and a piece of paper. Settling down at the table, the younger prince drew a detailed map of the area. Chris was surprised. It was incredible. Shutra's map was more detailed than his. Chris's. Hugging his younger brother, the seventh prince exclaimed that Shutra was simply a genius. Caitlyn said that all those guys from the Crimson Light are dead. The tribe doesn't know that they know about their underground tunnels. Chris turned to his younger brother again. He wanted to ask Shutra for something else. The ninth prince and his squad moved quietly through the forest thicket. Karak asked, so they should patrol the zone again. The prince shrugged. There was no choice. He was the youngest in the family. It's good that they have reinforcements now. If they encounter enemies, they'll be able to fight back. Suddenly, Ju saw that their squad was being met by two mysterious figures in hooded cloaks. One of the figures lifted its hood, and the young man saw that it was Caitlyn who stood before him. The prince asked his sister in surprise what kind of cloak it was, but she mysteriously put her finger to her lips. She said that she was secretly following her younger brother just in case, and if he was in danger, she would intervene. Ju was confused. Was she really going to support him? Had she gone crazy? The girl suddenly said that she needed his achievement. Caitlyn's companion introduced herself as Sarah, Her Highness's adjutant. The warriors said that they would cover their squad, so they don't have to worry. Soon the entrance to the secret cave they were about to explore appeared. The squad cautiously entered inside and moved forward. The young man was surprised why the caves were empty. Carrack assumed that the dwarves had taken everything. So who would leave something valuable behind? The prince asked what about the weapon they found last time. Apparently, they didn't consider it valuable. The cave became narrower and narrower. The steps of the detachment echoed loudly far ahead. Suddenly Carrack said to the prince that it seemed like someone was coming towards them. The young man also heard the noise. The minimap showed the young man that a fairly large detachment was moving towards them. Shutra said mysteriously, "It looks like it's them. We need to prepare for battle." With a wave of his hand, the player opened his inventory. Ju took the flash spell just in case. In one of the player's inventory slots, there was a small bottle of golden liquid. Taking out the magic bottle, the prince told everyone to close their eyes at his command. The members of the prince's squad froze, all looking tensely ahead, expecting the appearance of enemies. Soon, a multitude of blood-red eyes lit up ahead. Their opponents were already very close. Stone spiders were moving towards the orcs. These cave monsters live in large groups and their poison paralyzes. Seeing the spiders, the young man shouted loudly for everyone to close their eyes immediately. The warriors obediently closed their eyes, and Ju threw a bottle at the approaching enemies. He cast a spell, and the contents of the bottle suddenly burst into a bright golden light. The entire space above the cave spiders was filled with bright light, as if the summer sun had peered into the cave. The cave monsters closed their eyes and squealed, the bright light burning them like fire. Stone spiders are helpless in the light because they live in darkness. The prince commanded the warriors to kill the spiders. Seeing that the monsters were squinting from the light, the orcs boldly rushed at them. A fight ensued. The spiders tried to resist, but the bright light almost blinded them. Carrack's fighters deftly wielded their huge axes, quickly killing the blinded monsters. Ju watched the battle closely and periodically glanced at the minimap. It was necessary to make sure that another group of stone spiders did not come in response to the noise. From his gaming experience, the young man knew that stone spiders hunt in groups, and in each group there must be a leader, the strongest and most evil monster. The prince called Carrack to follow him. They needed to deal with the leader of these spiders. Leaving the ordinary monsters to the squad, Carrack and Prince Shutra Ignis ran forward to look for the main enemy. Soon they saw him. This monster was equally terrible and disgusting. The giant stone spider hissed, opening its mouth with several rows of sharp, poisonous teeth. Carrack let out a battle cry and bravely jumped onto the monster. The chief quickly attacked the huge spider with his axe. Blows of incredible force rained down on the monster one after another, but the spider did not even flinch. Carrack looked at the enemy in surprise. He didn't understand why his blows didn't harm the spider. Is his shell so strong that a battle axe can't even scratch it? And Ju completely forgot that an axe could not penetrate the thick exoskeleton of a stone spider. This monster is vulnerable to fire, but the young man cannot yet use magic, at which time the spider growled menacingly. The monster's huge body began to move. It rose to its paws and moved towards its enemies. The stone spider opened its huge fanged mouth, from which streams of poison flowed, capable of paralyzing even a giant. Carrack stood bravely in the monster's path and feverishly thought about how to stop it. The prince shouted at him to use fire. The orc asked in confusion where he could get fire. And then the young man heard his sister's voice behind him. She shouted for Shutra to raise his sword. Ju obediently raised the blade up, and at that very second it burst into flames. The young man couldn't believe it. But where did the magic come from, since it wasn't yet available to him? Caitlin asked if that would be enough for him to defeat the stone spider. Meanwhile, the monster was getting closer and closer. Just a little more, and his faithful Carrack would die. The prince clutched the flaming sword in his hand. His eyes suddenly became unchildishly hard. He prepared to attack. Ju suddenly felt like the son of a great lord, a young prince of demons. The young man pushed off from the stone floor of the cave and rushed into battle with the huge monster. Sensing the fire, the spider recoiled, but Prince Shutra could no longer be stopped. He rushed forward. Soon the entire body of the leader of the pack of stone spiders was engulfed in flames. The 9th demon prince defeated the giant monster with a flaming blade. Turning around, he smiled. The flames that engulfed the leader of the stone spiders grew ever more violent, and the group of monsters was defeated. Ju stood to the side and looked at the huge fire that the spider had turned into. And suddenly he saw a golden light flowing around his body. He felt stronger again. The game informed the boy that his level had increased, apparently as a result of the fight with the spider. Ju opened the status window. He was already at level 9, and his stats had also increased significantly. Caitlin asked how Shutra was feeling and what that light was that appeared around him. He answered sheepishly. It was some kind of blessing that happens. The girl decided that it was a blessing from the Gandharva. Caitlin was surprised that Shutra fought the spider so well. The guy explained that he just read about them. Karak turned to his master, offering to see what the giant spider was guarding. It seemed like there was some kind of door there. Everyone looked questioningly at the find. Surprisingly, opening the heavy doors was not difficult. Prince Shutra, Caitlin, Sira, and Karak entered a spacious stone room lit by torches. The young man asked in confusion what was in front of them. It looked like this room was built by magicians. In front of them, a bluish ball glowed in the center of a strange sign. Ju assumed it was a city portal. Karak asked the prince if he knew what it was. He replied that he didn't know for sure, but he had an idea. The patterns on the floor around the glowing ball were very similar to dwarven ones. Ju never saw these while playing as Zephyr, but I did see them a couple of times while playing as the hero. He suggested that if mana was poured into the ball, the portal would be activated. Turning to his companions, Prince Shutra said that perhaps this was a portal. Caitlin was very surprised, but Sarah confirmed that, judging by his appearance, the prince might be right. But how can one know where he is leading? Karak called the prince again. It seemed there was some kind of inscription engraved on the wall. Everyone approached the tablet discovered by Karak. These are clearly not demonic writings. They look very much like dwarven letters. Karak asked the princess if she could read, but she replied irritably that she didn't need to know dwarven. She asked her adjutant Sarah, but she also did not know the language and could not read it. And suddenly everyone heard the voice of Prince Shutra Ignis. He said that it said Portal Number 2, Gishkovi Mountains. And this portal is also connected to Portal Number 3. Everyone froze and looked at the young man. Ju himself was no less surprised than his companions. Could his hero really read dwarven? Suddenly, a game message arrived that the young man had received a new skill, dwarven language, which meant he could learn languages as well. Karak asked the prince in surprise if he could really read it. Shutra answered in confusion. Apparently yes. Caitlin asked her brother since when he knew dwarven, and Sarah asked him to read what was written below. The prince answered uncertainly. It seemed the portal would activate if filled with mana. Turning to Caitlin, the young man asked if she could pour some mana into the portal. The girl was surprised. Why her? Shutra smiled shyly. He hadn't quite gotten used to it yet. In fact, he didn't know how to use magic at all yet. Caitlin agreed and, approaching the portal, poured some of her magical power into it. Having received a magical boost, the blue ball began to emit a bright glow. Soon the entire room was filled with a bluish light from the portal. A glowing projection of the Gishkov Mountains appeared above the astonished demons. It looked like a three-dimensional map. Ju realized that one point was their location, and the other was Portal Number 3, which meant there were dwarven tunnels there too. Karak noticed that the main force of the red lightning was located just in front of these mountains, meaning they could strike the enemies from behind. Caitlin suggested returning to camp for now. We need to discuss this information with Chris. The seventh prince was extremely surprised. Who would have thought that there was a portal in such a place? He happily hugged his younger brother and exclaimed that Shutra was simply incredible. Chris said that if the little one needs anything, just let him know. He will definitely help if it is in his power. The young man sheepishly refused, but Chris, as the leader and older brother, wanted to reward Shutra. Moonlight said he would be offended if little Shutra Ignis refused his gift. Ju asked Chris if it was okay if it was something unreasonable. The seventh prince was intrigued. Shutra asked if his brother could teach him the art of hand-to-hand combat of the beast god. Chris was at a loss. He certainly didn't expect such a request from the youngest and weakest prince. Ju knew that his hero's level meant he couldn't wield weapons properly, but techniques were a different matter entirely. The beast god's hand-to-hand combat art has been passed down through the lycanthrope royal family for generations, and is a powerful S-rank martial art. Prince Shutra asked Chris with a sigh. This was probably too difficult. He immediately thought so. Oh well. After a moment of silence, Moonlight suddenly replied that he would teach his younger brother some tricks. Of course, he won't be able to teach him secret techniques, but he will learn the basics of Shutra. Ju clenched his fists happily. Was it really true that Chris said that he would at least teach Shutra aura? This was not quite what the young man wanted, and he fell silent in confusion. The seventh prince asked the boy if this suited him. Shutra Ignis quickly agreed with his older brother. He wanted him to at least start teaching him. And then the young man noticed that his older brother and sister had become unusually serious. Chris Moonlight asked Shutra if he could now consider him his real brother. The young man was surprised. They were supposedly brothers anyway. But it seemed Chris and Caitlin thought differently. And then he remembered that for Chris and Caitlin's family, brother is a very important word. Ju didn't see anything wrong with teaming up with these two. He even liked the idea. Extending his hand to the seventh prince, Shutra responded positively, and the brothers shook hands firmly. The brother and sister were happy. It seemed that this was precisely why they had originally come to Shutra's camp. The player was also pleased that in order to defeat the powerful Zephyr, he needed allies to work together. The game informed Ju that he had formed an alliance with Chris Moonlight and Caitlin Moonlight, and the alliance status was normal. And beyond the mountains, the rebels were once again gathering an army of Red Orcs to fight the troops of the hated Demon Lord. In the Red Orcs' military camp, fires were burning and crimson banners were fluttering everywhere. Today, the rebel camp was especially lively. Everyone was watching their commander's tent with interest. And he was talking with an important captive. He was telling the princess that she would not have come here if she had been aiming for this place in the first place. He persistently asked the girl what had brought the highborn princess to them. Sitting on the floor, wounded and chained, was the 6th demon princess, Felicia Dumbledore. Ju didn't realize when he first leveled up, all of his stats increased by 2. But then, for some unknown reason, charisma began to increase by only 1. The young man tried to understand why this was happening. In the original game, charisma and appearance were different characteristics. Appearance affects the beauty of the character, and charisma is how much others will like the character. Apparently there is something to this, because Prince Shutra Ignis has been developing quite well so far. Moreover, judging by the points he has earned, Ju's hero should soon reach level 10. According to the story, when Zephyr and Locke reach level 10, their unique skills, Chosen One and Scion of Darkness, improve by 1 level. Ju was hoping that when he reached level 10, one of his skills would also improve. When Karak looked into the tent, the prince turned to his faithful companion, who said that everything was ready and they could set off. Karak noticed that the prince was in a great mood today. Something good must have happened. The 9th prince, accompanied by the mighty Karak, went to the warriors of the detachment who were waiting for them. The strong fighters looked with devotion at the old commander and the very young son of the demon lord. Prince Shutra smiled and cheerfully said that it was time for them to leave on their mission. The demon lord's children's squads once again headed to the mountains, to where they had previously discovered the portal. Before them again was the same tunnel where they encountered the mighty stone spiders. Now the warriors of Karak fought side by side with the warriors of the squad of Chris and Caitlin Moonlight. Soon the passage to the coveted door was cleared, and the allies could set out on reconnaissance. Leaving the troops to guard the tunnel, the 2 princes, the princess, Karak and Sarah, went to the magical portal. Chris asked the family mages if they had finished their investigation. The old wolf answered his master that, as he had said, this portal was connected to the Eska River in the Gishkov Mountains. The 7th prince asked if the portal was functioning, and the magician confirmed that it was strong. In this case, they can go and quietly observe the enemy camp. The magicians poured mana into the sphere and opened a portal for the passage of highborn scouts. The ball, filled with magical energy, began to glow, filling the room with sparkling light once again. Right behind the ball, a large gate opened, and the scouts saw the place where they would exit. Ju and Karak looked at the magical passage as if enchanted. It was their first time passing through the portal. The young man couldn't believe he was seeing the gates in real life. He had seen them many times in the game, but to see them like this. Caitlin asked her younger brother what he was waiting for. He needed to go. Having come to his senses, the young man caught up with the company. With bated breath, Ju approached the magical gate. For an ordinary schoolboy, this was surprising. After passing through the gate, Chris, Caitlin, Shutra, Karak, and Sira found themselves in the mountains near the rebel camp. Looking down from the cliff, the young man was surprised. The Red Lightning Tribe's military camp looked quite impressive. In the center was a fortified command camp, and around it, as far as the eye could see, were the tents of numerous warriors. Chris Moonlight was pleased as they expected. This is where the enemy camp is located. Judging by their size, there are about 5,000 of them. If the prince's detachment attacks from the rear, they will gain an advantage. If General Bandel attacks from the front to distract them, then the demon spies will burn the enemy supplies. And then Sarah noticed that something was wrong here. There were too few people in this camp. After taking a closer look, Chris agreed. Sarah was right. But where did they go? Maybe they had already started attacking. Looking around, the 9th prince saw some strange movement in the distance. Prince Shutra pointed into the distance and asked what it was. It seemed to resemble the sounds of battle. Chris told his younger brother to focus his aura on his eyes. The young man followed the 7th prince's advice and tensed up, trying to direct the aura to his eyes. And suddenly the image of the battle seemed to come closer. Prince Shutra exclaimed that he saw what was happening. Caitlin said, "It looks like on one side there is the Red Lightning Tribe, but who are the others? General Bandel wasn't planning any battles, but apparently, it's not a small battle going on there." Ju concentrated and peered into the distance, trying to discern the Red Orc's opponents. Among the fighters, he saw a girl riding a dragon. She seemed very familiar to the young man. Suddenly the 9th prince said, It looks like the Dark Elves are fighting the Red Orcs. Caitlin was surprised why Shutra decided this. The young man explained that they are smaller than orcs and fight riding dragons. Chris was watching the battle closely. Suddenly he said that the Dark Elves were retreating. Moonlight guessed that the elven commander had fallen because they were leaving so quickly. Karak asked in confusion what was going on here. Was the fight really over already? It happened suspiciously quickly. Ju wondered what the Dark Elves could be doing here. It didn't fit into the overall strategy. The scouts passed through the magical gates again, and soon returned to their camp accompanied by the army. The princes decided to discuss the situation with General Bandel, who asked if it was true that they had found a dwarven portal. The general praised Chris for his useful find, asking how they had not known he was there. Chris objected, saying that it was not he who found the portal, but the 9th Prince Shutra. The young man embarrassedly said that he was just lucky. Ju was surprisingly pleased to see General Bandel again, and he said that Shutra would be rewarded at the Demon King's castle. The 7th Prince asked the general if he knew about a small skirmish that had occurred in front of the Red Lightning Tribe's camp. The general replied that most likely it was the Dark Elves. Apparently they themselves decided to intervene. Chris did not understand why the elves needed this. The prince asked if this was reinforcements from the Demon King's castle, and Bandel found it difficult to give a clear answer. The general assumed that the elves were planning to conduct reconnaissance before intervening, but apparently something went wrong. It seems that the independent squad of the Dark Elf leader was caught by the Red Lightning Tribe, so there was a fight. Prince Shutra asked Bandel who commanded the independent Dark Elf squad. General Bandel chuckled and frowned. The young gentlemen know her very well. At the head of the squad was their sister, the 6th Princess Felicia Dumbledore. Chris and Caitlin's mouths dropped open in surprise, meaning they had witnessed their older sister's capture. Felicia Dumbledore was the daughter of Sylvia Dumbledore, the 3rd Queen and Princess of the Dark Elves, and the twin sister of the 5th Prince, Sylvan Dumbledore. In the game, Felicia and Sylvan belonged to the faction of the 4th Princess Anastasia Necreon. Ju, playing as Zephyr, always considered them enemies. The young man wondered what Felicia was doing here. Perhaps she had intervened to prove her merits. Chris clenched his fists. Those Red Lightning bastards at least realized they had Princess Felicia in their hands. The general couldn't say anything for sure yet. They hadn't been able to confirm it yet. Chris asked what they would do. The general promised to try to save her. But Bandel was not going to be the first to bow to the rebels and ask for negotiations. At the end of the conversation, the general said that he would gather information from the other side, and if anything, would contact the young gentleman. The 7th Prince replied to the commander that they understood everything, and the communication session had come to an end. Chris Moonlight frowned. It seemed their unrivaled sister had become a hostage to the rebels. Caitlin exclaimed. "We need to save her if she is still alive," her brother agreed. "It would be nice, but it just won't happen." The boy reminded his sister that if they tried to save her, they could get hurt themselves. But Caitlin insisted that they would save her. They had to do it. She was their sister after all. Chris frowned and remained silent, apparently not sharing his younger sister's opinion about Felicia. Ju watched his brother and sister closely, wondering why they were acting like this. Still, the relationship between the children of the Demon Lord is definitely not as simple as it might seem. In the main tent of Chris and Caitlin's military camp, a military meeting was taking place. The troops were preparing for the upcoming battle. Laying out a detailed map of the area on the table, Chris Moonlight said their plan was extremely simple. Once General Bandel has the main force of the Red Lightning Tribe engaged, the 3 of them will attack the camp from the rear. Chris will head to the center of the base and cause maximum chaos. Caitlin and Shutra will have their own squads for the task. Shutra asked if the task was to save their sister, Chris confirmed. But first they would burn the enemy's supplies and weapons. If danger arises, Shutra and Caitlin must retreat. They cannot lose more lives for Felicia. Caitlin turned angrily to her brother, but he reminded his sister that for now, he was in command here. The girls screamed that Felicia was their family, but Chris objected. They couldn't let Felicia's carelessness interfere with the entire operation. Ju silently watched the altercation. It seemed Chris was in no hurry to save Felicia. Apparently, something had happened between them. Everything was ready for the combat operation. Dusk descended on the mountains. All the soldiers took their places and waited for the command. The fighters of the demonic army cautiously approached the enemy camp, and then General Bandala gave the command to the soldiers to storm the enemy fortifications. The beasts, orcs, and ogres rushed forward with a roar. The general ordered the destruction of these traitors from the Red Lightning Tribe. Chris, Caitlin, and Shutra with their squads passed through the magical gates and hid in ambush. The 7th Demon Prince stared at the enemy camp, waiting for General Bandel's main forces to attack. The Red Lightning Tribe's location was calm for now. It seemed they didn't even suspect the impending attack. Chris Moonlight looked tired and exhausted. Although this was not typical for him, some thoughts were bothering the prince. And finally the night attack began. Explosions were heard, and part of the enemy camp was engulfed in flames. Flames and stones mixed into a deadly stream and destroyed some of the Red Lightning Tribe's fighters. A powerful army, led by the formidable General Bandle, was already approaching the rebels' location. The commander, his eyes flashing, growled the order to kill every single rebel. While the main battle was going on, Prince Shutra's detachment sat in ambush and watched what was happening. Karak asked the ruler in bewilderment why they were standing there, since the attack had already begun. The young man replied that they were waiting for a signal. Two irreconcilable armies clashed in a fierce battle. Eyes and fangs flashed, blood flowed like a river. General Bandle's detachment was noticeably pushing back the red orcs, and soon the battlefield was strewn with the bodies of the dead and wounded. The general watched the progress of the battle closely, remembering the plan that Prince Chris Moonlight had developed. We need to anger the Red Lightning Tribe rebels a little more. Finally, Bandle realized that it was time to retreat. He ordered the soldiers to retreat, dragging the enemies along with him. Chris kept his eyes on the battlefield, and then he saw that the general began to retreat, and the red orcs rushed after him. The prince turned around and commanded everyone to get ready. Now it was their turn to perform. The commander-in-chief reminded everyone that everything had to be done exactly according to plan, and Shutra nodded his head in agreement. The seventh prince shouted loudly forward and ran towards the enemy camp. The Red Lightning Tribe's warriors, exhausted by the battle, did not expect another attack, this time from the rear. Squads of fresh demonic warriors pounced on the red orcs, tired from the recent battle. Caitlin asked Shutra to be careful in battle, and the young man wished the same for his sister. Ju activated the minimap to see where everything was and whether an enemy was approaching him. The young man shouted to Karak to go to the left, where there was a supply depot that needed to be burned. Seeing enemy warriors ahead, Karak shouted an order to kill them and clear the way. The old warrior struck down the enemy who stood in their way with a powerful blow, and his warriors also rushed into battle. Suddenly, a huge orc appeared in front of Karak and swung at the commander of Prince Shutra Ignis's squad. Karak was confused for a second about where this red orc came from. He was standing too close for a long weapon. But suddenly a dagger pierced the red orc's nose. Ju had thrown it to save his faithful Karak. The game informed the young man that he had acquired the dagger throwing skill and could now throw daggers at a target. Ju was literally breathless. He was already enjoying being inside the game. A smile played on his face. Karak asked the prince in surprise when he learned to throw daggers, but he replied that it was nothing. They needed to hurry. Finally, they reached the warehouse. The orc asked Shutra if the warehouse just needed to be set on fire. The young man confirmed. And then it dawned on Ju. What about Felicia? If she was in the warehouse, she could burn along with the supplies. The young man told Karak that they needed to find Felicia first, and the orc asked in surprise how to find her in such a large camp. Ju called up his minimap again. It should tell him where the captive demon princess was hidden. Felicia should be neutral for Ju, so she will be marked in blue or purple on the map. The player carefully examined the map as he ran, and it seemed he had figured out where the red orcs were holding the sixth princess. He waved his hand at Karak, indicating the path they needed to run to save Felicia. The young man carefully parted the curtains at the entrance to one of the tents. Judging by the map, the captive should be right here. Shutra carefully walked inside and turned his head. But where was Felicia? Suddenly he heard someone call his name. Looking closely, the ninth prince saw a girl sitting on the floor. She was wounded and chained. The princess looked at her younger brother in surprise. Finally, Felicia Dumbledore, the sixth demon princess, asked Shutra what he was doing there. Unraveling the chains, the young man said that they would talk about everything later, but for now it would be better for Felicia not to twitch. Shutra said that it was dangerous here. We needed to untie her and run before the Red Orc guards arrived. Ju decided it would be useful if Princess Felicia were in his debt. The girl looked at the ninth prince in surprise. His arrival here had surprised her beyond words. Finally they got out of the tent. The young man told Felicia to run quickly to Chris and Caitlin. She was taken aback. Chris and Caitlin were here. Had they really come to save her? Shutra confirmed. Why else? How could they not save her? She is their own sister, the demon princess. Felicia said that Shutra had long been written off in the struggle for power, but then Karak warned the prince about the approach of enemies. The young man told the princess to quickly go to a safe place. Suddenly, the sixth princess asked when Shutra started calling her by her name. But the prince did not hear her question. He rushed towards his warriors, who were fighting the red orcs. Suddenly, the girl screamed for Shutra to be careful. There was danger behind him. The next second, a fiery arrow pierced the young man. He cried out in pain, and golden flames danced across his body. The prince was seriously wounded. Blood gushed from his mouth, and for a second Ju was afraid that he was going to die. In the place where Shutra had just stood, a huge fire suddenly blazed up. Karak and Felicia screamed in horror. The 9th Demon Prince's warriors looked at the fire sadly, believing that their master had died. Felicia Dumbledore timidly called out her youngest brother's name, hoping and not believing that he had survived. And then a red orc growled behind the princess, getting ready to kill the unarmed girl. Frowning and clenching her teeth in anger, Felicia instantly dealt with her opponent. Suddenly the girl noticed that someone unexpectedly came to her aid. The large orc running towards Felicia suddenly burst into flames after receiving a fire arrow. Turning around, the princess couldn't believe her eyes. The fire had gone out, and through the smoke the figure of Prince Shutra was visible. He was indeed alive. The young man took a few steps to leave the veil of smoke. Hero Ju received 2 skills, mana control and a fire arrow, and a fiery bow blazed in the prince's hands. The young man decided to immediately try out the combat magic skill he had just acquired. He sent one fiery arrow after another at the approaching enemies, and they burst into flames like wisps of dry straw. The prince's eyes were shining. Participating in the battle brought him true pleasure. The red orcs ran up and caught fire, and soon a living fire of slain enemies formed around Shutra. The mighty red orcs ran around their own military camp in terror. Ju laughed. That's what they deserve. It's amazing what real magic can do. But this is only the first level of skill. But it is already a very cool result. What will happen next? Suddenly, an ice arrow fell next to Shutra, and immediately snow and ice appeared around. A cold breeze immediately blew in, and the ground began to freeze and turn into pieces of ice. The young man raised his head and saw a magician on the tower, with a sparkling ice bow in his hands. Ju instantly realized that the mage was aiming at Felicia, who was approaching Shutra from behind, asking if he was okay. The 9th prince shouted at the girl not to come closer, and sharply pushed her aside. The princess was surprised at what the boy was doing, why he pushed her away, and suddenly she saw a hail of arrows flying towards the young man. But, strangely enough, the prince did not move from his place, as if he wanted the ice arrows to hit him. Ju really wanted this because then he would be able to obtain this magical skill as well. The player's eyes were shining, his cheeks were flushed. He had already gotten a taste for it and was eager to gain as many skills as possible. Now, in the place where Prince Shutra had just stood, a mountain of ice had grown, and snowflakes were sparkling around it. The young man found himself trapped in ice. Nothing could be seen around him, but he was still alive. He tensed up and used his mana to destroy the ice that had bound him. Shaking off the cold, he saw a system message. He had acquired the ice arrow skill, and the satisfied player laughed. But suddenly he swayed, feeling very weak, and Ju was confused about what had happened. Falling to the ground from weakness, the young man saw a huge piece of an ice arrow sticking out of his chest. The game informed him that his health had dropped significantly, and that he was in great danger, and Ju cursed. The young man clenched his teeth. With his health like that, he wouldn't survive another blow. Suddenly, Ju heard that he was an idiot. Felicia stood next to him, frowning and looking angrily at her younger brother. Suddenly the girl asked who asked him to save her. The guy was taken aback. What was she talking about? The princess said that he is the weakest among his brothers and sisters, so who else needs to be saved is a big question. The young man looked at her in confusion. It seemed Felicia had misunderstood something. Leaning towards her wounded brother, she asked when Shutra had mastered magic. Ju looked around. It seemed Felicia decided that he was saving her from arrows, and even knocked out the magician. The princess pulled out a piece of arrow stuck in Shutra's chest, and the young man cried out in pain. But soon he felt relief and a surge of strength, as if a life-giving drink had spread throughout his body. Felicia leaned over her brother and, with the help of elven magic, quickly healed his wound. A greenish, life-giving energy emanated from the girl's hands and healed everything it touched. The huge wound on Prince Shutra's chest healed in a matter of seconds, leaving only a scar. He was amazed. The wound instantly healed, and he received another skill. Now he could also heal. Ju thought with a smile. So that's what she's like. The brilliant magician Felicia Dumbledore. The girl asked her brother if he could go. And then they saw that a new attack was rushing straight towards them with a terrible roar. A giant bloody ogre, one of the mutated species, was approaching them, its scarlet eyes blazing. Felicia, looking at the enemy, asked, "So they need to deal with this giant?" The brother and sister raised their heads. Their enemy was truly of terrifying size, and also incredibly angry. The bloody ogre growled menacingly. He was very close to the prince and princess. The young man ran away as fast as he could, but how could he even fight someone like that? The giant struck the place where the brother and sister had just stood with his weapon, and the earth shook. Ju was puzzled as to why this mutant was so fast. Usually such enemies were clumsy. Felicia told Shutra to try to buy them some time, and she would blow away the ogre with magic. Another deafening blow was heard behind Shutra and Felicia. The young man frantically thought about how to distract the enemy. Finally, he told the princess that he would try to somehow distract the monster's attention. The prince called his faithful and brave Karak, and said that they would act as last time. The warrior must get ready. The player waved his hand and the game menu appeared in front of him. Now he needed to get into his inventory. Now Ju can probably use the dwarven blade found in the tunnel. A blade from the vault appeared in the young man's hand. He concentrated and prepared to empower his ally. Dropping to one knee, Ju thrust the power-giving weapon into the ground. A powerful golden energy of victory and power flared around the youngest prince. He cried out under the royal banner and sent a powerful stream of energy towards Karak. The warrior felt himself once again filled with amazing power. His fear disappeared, and it seemed that now he could do anything. Now Karak's figure was golden and exuded courage and immeasurable strength. He clenched his teeth and looked at the enemy. The old warrior frowned and let out a battle cry. The giant no longer seemed so invincible to him. The bloody ogre slowed down, noticing the surprising change in Karak. He looked at the orc in confusion. Karak, swinging his axe, rushed at the giant bloody ogre mutant. The two powerful warriors clashed. The ogre was defeated, the first time an ordinary orc had fought him. The orc screamed in horror. Karak dealt him several painful blows, wounding the monster. Filled with the victorious power of the king, Karak attacked the confused giant again and again. Swinging his axe, the orc struck the enemy in the stomach, causing the ogre to stagger and take a step back. The giant mutant clenched his teeth and frowned, wondering how long this insolent fellow could beat him with an axe. He swung his club at Karak when Felicia Dumbledore flew up behind the giant. The princess assessed the situation and came up with a way to help the brave Karak defeat the monster. She stretched out her arms and generated a huge puddle of fat under the feet of the bloody mutant ogre. The giant tried to take a step, but his feet slipped and slid across the slippery fat. The ogre, completely bewildered, fell on his back with a wild cry and stretched out in a pool of fat. Karak immediately took advantage of the situation, and pushing off from the ground, flew towards the terrible enemy. The bloody ogre lay in a pool of slippery fat and could not rise to its feet. Approaching the bloody mutant, the orc growled that the red ogre was finished. Karak struck his enemy again with his axe, and this time the blow proved fatal. The monster's eyes began to roll back and blood began to gush from its mouth. The brave commander of Shutra's squad dealt with the monster. The prince's magic wore off, and Karak himself could not believe that he had defeated such a formidable and enormous opponent. Satisfied, Ju decided to come closer and look at the defeated monster. The young man laughed. They had won. Of course, there were still a couple of opponents left, but they had dealt with the most problematic ones. And suddenly he noticed that he was enveloped in a radiance that always filled him with strength. The player now sees a system message he has been waiting for. Finally, his level has been increased to 10, which means that now his hero will definitely become much stronger. The game reported that the main character's customization level has also increased. The young man broke into a satisfied smile. This is simply wonderful. You need to see how his characteristics have changed. Due to the main character's customization effect, a new passive skill is added at the new level. The player opened the gift, and it turned out to be a battlefield defense skill, which makes it much more difficult to hit the hero. Ju was delighted. It was the Stormtrooper effect. All players have seen something like this at least once. With this effect, bullets fly like a hail, but for some reason not a single one hits the main character. With this skill, the young man will be able to produce the effect of plot armor for the main character. And then he heard a furious growl. A whole crowd of red orcs was rushing towards them. Felicia shouted at Shutra, asking why he was standing there. They would be demolished by those enraged rebels from the Red Arrow tribe. Suddenly, Felicia turned to the enemies running straight at her and frowned angrily, clenching her teeth. A tornado rushed from the princess in all directions, knocking the orcs off their feet. She called upon the wind, the whirlwind, and fury. The younger prince could barely stand on his feet, and looked with all his eyes at his older sister. What is happening now looks a lot like magic, but it seems that it is not. Suddenly, the young man realized that this was a spirit. This was definitely a spirit called to help by the elven princess. After all, broken or not, a dark elf is still an elf. Felicia is not just a great mage. She was born a spirit summoner. Ju watched in surprise as the princess gathered all the enemies into one sphere and sent them off in an unknown direction. The young man thought, I wonder if he could be hit by something like that. It's just a super skill. Karak asked the prince what kind of fire it was. The young man replied, it was yellow, which meant they had to retreat. Shutra didn't understand what was happening. why they ordered a retreat. Maybe someone was in danger. Karak asked what the prince would order, and he told the orc to take the troops and go to the gathering point. The young man himself decided to go to Caitlin. Perhaps she needed his help. The commander of the detachment told the prince that he would go with him. Shutra ordered Karaku to do as he said. But then Felicia came up to them and told Karak that she would go with Shutra to Caitlin. The ruler of the Dark Elves did not want to remain in debt and wanted to thank her saviors. Besides, Felicia wasn't finished with those pigs who had her chained up yet. Karak looked at his very young master with concern and asked him to be careful. Felicia asked Shutra if they really had to go to Caitlin. Did he really think she could lose like that? But the young man insisted that if everything was okay, then they would simply return together. Felicia asked if Shutra seemed worried about Caitlin. The prince confirmed, of course, she is his sister. In fact, he was worried because he and Caitlin are allies. The sixth demon princess looked closely at her youngest brother. She realized that he was not telling her everything. She was especially surprised by the word of course, but Shutra had changed a lot since their last meeting. Caitlin was indeed fighting against hordes of enemies, the red orcs pressing on the eighth demon princess from all sides. But it was very difficult to defeat her, running through the ranks of enemies. The girl dealt them powerful blows with lightning speed. Caitlin was a true representative of the lycanthropes, so she had an excellent command of the techniques of hand-to-hand combat with animals. Turning around, she saw another squad of Red Lightning tribe fighters approaching her. Suddenly the orcs burst into flames and turned into walking torches, screaming and dying as they ran. It was the princess who used fire magic. She stretched out her hand and set her enemies on fire. But then Caitlin heard the familiar growl again. The surviving warriors rushed at the young princess. Swords flashed in the hands of the red orcs. A couple more jumps and they would be next to Lady Moonlight. Suddenly, a magical weapon glowed in the girl's hand. The princess's eyes were cold and surprisingly calm. Caitlin lunged forward, one swing, and both her opponents received multiple mortal wounds. Felicia and Shutra stood to the side and silently watched this beautiful fight of their sister. Dumbledore chuckled. She knew it. There was absolutely no need to worry about Caitlin. Caitlin asked Shutra why they didn't retreat. He replied that they came to her aid, but she didn't need it at all. And only then did the eighth princess notice that Felicia, whom he had freed, was standing next to Shutra. Suddenly, Caitlin threw herself on Felicia's neck and hugged her. Caitlin's cheeks flushed and she exclaimed that she was so glad Felicia was okay. Dumbledore stuttered. Of course she was fine. Caitlin was worrying too much about it. The young man was somewhat surprised by this reaction. It seems these sisters are quite close. And then Ju glanced at the game minimap. It was definitely time for them to get out of here. The main detachment, which had followed General Bandel, was returning to the camp. He told the sisters that the enemies were returning and they needed to leave. Felicia told Shutra to lead them and they would cover. Most of the warriors have already left the dangerous territory, passing through the magical gates of the portal. Finally, the eighth princess, Caitlin Moonlight, joined them. Stepping onto the magical patterned floor, Felicia, who had been freed from captivity, and the youngest prince, Shutra, passed through the portal with Caitlin. Felicia was very surprised that it was Shutra who found the portal. Caitlin added that he made a huge contribution to the conquest. Looking at her little brother, Felicia thoughtfully said that it was strange. And when did he manage to change so much? Prince Chris Moonlight called out to the girls. They had finally returned, and he was already starting to worry. Turning to her brother, who was looking at her sternly, Caitlin smiled broadly. She happily announced that she had brought Felicia Dumbledore, but the sixth princess remained silent. Finally, she turned to Chris and politely thanked him for saving her, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Chris looked closely at the dark elf. It was clear that her appearance did not please him at all. After a pause, he finally responded to his older sister's greeting, confirming that Felicia was right. The squads of Chris, Shutra, and the princesses set up a temporary shelter in the tunnel next to the portal. Chris reported that General Bandel had won, apparently that Yakuzan bastard had surrendered after seeing the fire. Ju was surprised who this Yakuzan was, but Caitlin reminded him that he was the commander-in-chief of the Red Lightning tribe. Felicia asked if Yakuzan had surrendered. Chris explained that it wasn't quite true. He had escaped and would be able to fight again if he gathered allies. Chris announced that tomorrow they would hit Kairam, Kaichan's older brother. If he got involved with Yakuzan, they would be in trouble. Turning to Felicia, Chris asked how she got there, a question that had been bothering him for a long time. The princess explained that she had been exploring the nearby ruins, heard about the battle, and decided to help. Moonlight frowned and asked if it was true. He felt like something was wrong. But Felicia innocently asked her brother why she suddenly needed to lie. Chris stared at the sixth princess. He knew that she was strong and couldn't have been captured just like that. Felicia Dumbledore held that gaze calmly. She had long known that Chris didn't like her. Finally, he turned around and walked away, saying that the girls were probably tired and suggested that they call it a day. The dark elf ruler lowered her head and fell silent. It seemed Chris suspected something. After the battle, the warriors cooked dinner and ate with appetite. Some, having had their fill, went to bed. Ju opened the panel with acquired skills. 4 new skills were displayed there. It was nice to look at. Apparently he can only use aura in battle. And suddenly he heard someone calling the prince's name. Felicia decided to go to the young man. She had already managed to change her clothes and tidy herself up after being captured. Seeing the dark elf ruler approach him with determination, he asked in confusion what had happened. But the demon princess's slender legs in high-heeled boots were inexorably approaching him. Leaning toward her youngest brother, Felicia softly called his name. Suddenly the girl stuck her finger into the hole in the prince's chest and pulled him towards her by his clothes. The young prince opened his mouth in surprise. What was she planning? Why did she come to him? Pulling the blushing youth towards her, the demon princess asked if Shutra could undress. The guy was stunned. Why did she want him to undress? They were brother and sister after all. But Felicia, smiling, handed Shutra a new outfit, pointing out that his old one had been torn by an arrow. The prince asked the 6th princess in confusion why she wanted him to undress now. The girl blinked her eyelashes in surprise and asked, "But he wants her to heal him." The young man smiled, but he was completely healthy. Felicia had healed his wound back there on the battlefield. The elf explained that she had only given him first aid so that he could walk on his own. He may have internal wounds, so she will now cast a normal spell on him. Casually, she asked why the young man was glowing, and he replied that everything was fine, it just happened to him. Shutra said that he had a request for Felicia Dumbledore. The girl was very surprised. The prince said with a smile that only Felicia could fulfill this request. The ruler of the Dark Elves listened attentively to her younger brother's wish. The princess fulfilled his request, and Shutra acquired 3 types of healing skills. The satisfied player read the description of the abilities acquired with Felicia's help and thought, very good indeed. Thanks to the 6th princess, he received 3 new healing spells, and another useful lesson awaits him today. Caitlin came in later and explained that there were several schools of hand-to-hand combat. Today they will begin to study the beast's technique, and finally he will learn this amazing art. Beast combat is a martial art that represents the lycanthrope royal family. This is the beast god's primary hand-to-hand combat technique, which is probably why Caitlin decided to teach Shutra. The beast technique uses both internal and external aura. Today Caitlin will teach her brother the basics of using the internal aura. The girl told Shutra to close his eyes and concentrate on his aura. The young man closed his eyes, directed his attention inward, and suddenly physically felt the movement of the aura. The aura, the life force, like a warm liquid, flowed throughout his body. He felt it in his legs, even in his toes. Circulating through his body like blood, it warmed his hands, making them strong and quick. This is the power closest to the power of the soul. Reaching its limit, it becomes the power of the soul. Opening his eyes, the prince looked around in surprise. His room was filled with bright, snow-white light. The game informed Ju that he had received the passive skill, the protagonist's constitution, and the young man was surprised. It increases the learning efficiency of other physical skills, and as you level up, the corresponding traits will be unlocked. Ju was stunned. He also received Archmage's Constitution and Hero's Blood. But these are Zephyr and Luke's passive abilities. He knew perfectly well that with new levels, the system adds completely new functions to these skills. The boy's eyes lit up. So this is what it's like to be the main character. He clenched his fists. This is damn cool. Caitlin called out to Shutra what he was doing. The girl asked her brother to concentrate and not get distracted. Now they will begin their first training. The young man joyfully exclaimed that he was ready. Soon, Prince Shutra's fists began to blaze, and he was able to concentrate his aura in them and gain the skill of beast-like hand-to-hand combat. Caitlin was delighted. Her brother mastered the basics of hand-to-hand combat so quickly. It's impressive. Ju felt like he was holding a deadly weapon even though his hands were empty, meaning this technique allowed him to fight without weapons. Caitlin suggested moving on to learning the next technique when a messenger came running for the princess. The wolf informed the princess that His Highness Prince Chris Moonlight was urgently calling her. Chris, frowning, informed everyone that Kyram's troops had suddenly disappeared. Chris, Shutra, Caitlin, and Felicia stood over the map of the area and couldn't understand what had happened. The 7th prince assumed that this freak Kyram understood their plan, and Caitlin asked what they should do now. Chris pointed his finger at the map. According to General Bandel, Yakujan and Kyram were supposed to meet here. Considering the mountainous and wooded terrain, this was entirely possible. Shutra suggested dealing a decisive blow to the enemy. Chris agreed. They needed to team up with General Bandle and wage an all-out war against the Red Lightning tribe. The princes and princesses, led by Chris, arrived at the rebellion suppression headquarters with their troops. The distinguished guests were met by General Bandela himself, who noted that Prince Chris had come a long way. Moonlight exclaimed that the general hadn't changed a bit, no matter how long it had been since they had seen Bandala. The general turned to Felicia, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time either. But she asked how her subordinates were, and Bandala replied that they were fine. Ju looked at one of his favorite game characters with a smile. He used it the most in the game, which is probably why the general is so familiar to him. Extending his hand, Prince Shutra introduced himself and said that he was very pleased to meet the renowned general. Bandala looked silently at the youngest son of the demon lord, whom no one took seriously. He extended his finger to the youngest prince and replied that the feeling was mutual. Ju again saw before him the golden-haired beauty, enveloped in a golden glow. The beauty had eyes of different colors. She looked at the player sadly and even reproachfully. Suddenly, another girl appeared next to Goldilocks, wearing a mask and red armor. The eyes of the warrior in the red suit were burning, and fire was blazing around her. The girl with different eyes was calm, though strong, and she looked at Ju with hope. The girl in red armor was the very embodiment of strength and unstoppable energy. They stood next to each other, radiating light and fire, and looked at the main character of this game. The young man could not understand who they were and why he saw them, but suddenly he saw the signs on the girl's armor. The sign of conquest was on the armor of the blonde with different eyes and depicted a sword with a crown. The red-haired beauty in red armor was marked with the sign of war. Ju opened his eyes and sat up on the wide bed. He was in the tent of Prince Shutra Ignis. So it was a dream. It's quite strange to sleep and dream inside a game. But he had definitely already seen that blonde with different eyes when he died in the game. But who was this woman in red? He had never seen her before. He would definitely remember such a heroine. Karak looked into the prince's tent and urged Shutra. The united forces were already moving out. Having quickly gathered his things, the ninth prince, together with his faithful Karak, went to the general gathering place. The camp was bustling with activity. The orcs were hauling supplies and weapons. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming battle. In this battle, Prince Shutra and his detachment were sent to the left flank. Bandala commands the center, Chris and Caitlin lead the left flank, and the Dark Elves protect the rear. The main forces of the Demon Lord came out against the united forces of the Orc rebels. Prince Shutra didn't even notice how he found himself in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by thousands of enemies. Two armies lined up against each other, a massive tribe of red orcs unwilling to submit to the Demon Lord. Opposite them stood powerful enslavement forces, whose main task was to suppress the rebellion and avenge the murdered. The commander-in-chief of the Demon Lord's forces, General Bandala, ordered everyone to form up. He growled that today they would show these freaks what pain was and avenge their treacherously killed friends. Bandala commanded the troops to attack the enemy. The beasts and orcs rushed into the attack with a roar. But the red orcs were in no hurry to enter the battlefield. Covered by their shields, they calmly waited for the enemy. The Red Lightning tribe's chief mage laughed contemptuously, calling his enemies idiots. Suddenly, explosions were heard on the battlefield, scattering Bandal's warriors in different directions. The general didn't understand what the hell was going on the battlefield. Had the enemy really minded in advance? But this was not the only surprise prepared by the rebels in this battle. Behind the warriors of the Red Lightning tribe, giant evil monsters appeared. Bandala was stunned. Were they really facing swamp mammoths? These monsters are not easy to deal with. The ground beneath the Demon Lord's army continued to explode. Powerful explosions were heard here and there, scattering and killing General Bandal's soldiers. Everyone was terrified. No one knew where the next explosion would occur. Soldiers were dying before they even had time to enter the battle. Fire and stones destroyed the warriors faster than the swords and axes of the Red Orcs. Everyone looked with horror at their brothers dying in the fire, and were afraid to take a step forward. Ju exclaimed. So they knew everything from the beginning and prepared for this battle. The two armies did meet, but their forces were clearly not equal. The swamp mammoths breathed fire, covering the red orcs. The swamp mammoth resembles the ordinary one, but still cannot be compared to it. This is the embodiment of ugliness, malice, and power. Such a monster can be defeated, but it is very difficult. Ju could never have imagined that he would be able to see this monster in real life like this. But besides the swamp mammoths, other equally dangerous monsters fought on the side of the red orcs. They were lizardmen, strong and aggressive warriors with huge claws, teeth, and tough skin. The orcs looked in horror at the new dangerous enemies. This battle was becoming more and more terrible. Ju looked around. He recognized the lizardmen. He had encountered them earlier in the game. Chris cursed, so the rebels knew everything about their movements and were just playing with them. Caitlin called out to her brother and said that it was best for them to retreat now and look for other options. But if they cannot make an orderly retreat, they will suffer even more, perhaps even be killed. Caitlin insisted that they needed to decide very quickly. It was time to retreat before their troops were killed. Having climbed the rock, Prince Chris, as a commander, addressed his subordinates. He ordered the mages to create a defense in the rear and hold out as long as they could, while the rest were to prepare to retreat. The lizard men greedily rushed at the warriors and tore them with teeth and claws. The orcs fought them off with axes. Many were wounded. One of the lizard men rushed at Prince Shutra with a growl, the blood of the victims it had killed dripping from the monster's saber. But before he could get close to the young prince, he received a crushing blow from Karak. The old warrior shouted for the lord to come to his senses. One wrong move, and they would all be finished. Ju came to his senses. Karak was right. This wasn't a game. He really could die in this strange world. Prince Chris Moonlight burst into the thick of the battle, killing the enemies around him with astonishing speed. Chris shouted to everyone to come back alive no matter what and not to dare die. The surviving demon troops after the bloody battle set up camp in a mountain gorge. The dark elves healed numerous wounded, many died, and the mood in the camp was sad. Chris Moonlight blamed himself for everything. It was his oversight. He should have suspected something was wrong right away. Bandala said what's done is done. Now they have to either retreat or ask for reinforcements from the Demon King's castle. Chris agreed with the general. He couldn't allow his subjects to go to their deaths because of his pride. Felicia Dumbledore suddenly intervened in the conversation, having come up with an interesting idea. She came to this area primarily to inspect the ruins, and her final destination was the peak of the Gishkov Mountains. Felicia may be an exceptional mage, but even in the game she wasn't a fighter. Her skills were focused on exploration. The sixth princess walked over to the detailed map of the area lying on the table. She has been studying the ruins for a long time. The lair of the stone dragon Enkidu has been in these mountains for 1,500 years. This dragon, born from magma, attracted various guardians to protect its lair and treasures. Among the guards were dwarves who once lived in the Gishkov Mountains, and Enkidu gave them weapons to protect their lair. An anvil that generates thunder. This relic allows not only to control the chimeras created to serve as guardians. With this anvil you can cast victorious spells for an entire army. Felicia was convinced that if they wanted to defeat those monsters, this was their only option. The princess came here to search for this relic. Bandala asked if she knew the exact location of the magic anvil. The girl replied that this was all she knew. Chris winced, not very useful information. Chris said they didn't know when the enemy would strike their weakened forces again. At a time like this, they can't risk their lives for a stupid treasure hunt. Felicia was angry. Suddenly Shutra said, "The anvil that produces thunder is definitely here." That's right. When Ju was playing as Locke as the main character, he encountered her once. The prince explained that he had discovered a related story while studying dwarven runes. And on top of all that, he trusts his older sister, Felicia Dumbledore. Felicia looked at the ninth prince in surprise. She did not expect to receive support from this side at all. The Dark Elf Queen thanked her younger brother in confusion, and he decided it was time to score points. Chris was unhappy. He said it wasn't about trust if they wasted their time. Ju smiled. Chris was so stubborn. Shutra pointed to the map and said that there was a similar legend among the Gandharva tribe. The chances are high that the entrance to the ruins is somewhere nearby. If he goes to explore the area, he will definitely find it. Shutra said that he took responsibility for everything that might happen if he failed, and asked them to trust him. Felicia summoned phantom flying steeds, and a campaign of seekers set out to find the artifact. Besides Shutra and the princesses, the expedition, as always, included the faithful Karak and Caitlin's adjutant Sarah. Chris remained in the camp. Ju was pleased. It was good that he had managed to secure the right to search for the magic anvil. Karaku did not like the ride on the flying horses at all. He shouted at the prince to hold on tighter, otherwise he might fall. The young man smiled to himself. He wouldn't fall. When he played for Zephyr, he rode like that all the time. Ju activated the game's minimap to get his bearings on where to look for the anvil. At this rate, they should be at the entrance in about an hour, and with this minimap, it won't be hard to find the ruins themselves. The problem is how the young man can direct his companions in a way that looks natural. The player thought, none of his companions should understand who he really is. Well, okay, Ju still has a whole hour ahead of him, during which time he will definitely come up with something. The young man said that the last time he found the portal, he carefully studied the maps of the tunnels. They had a certain pattern. If he combines this terrain with the position of the tunnels, he can roughly determine where the anvil is. None of the companions understood exactly what the prince had said, but Felicia offered to lead them. Catelyn was hesitant. But the elf ruler said that she understood everything and was ready to follow her younger brother. Ju was surprised. He was just bluffing. But did this explanation really work? Yet Felicia Dumbledore was wary, surprised by the younger prince's extensive knowledge. Karak said in confusion that they had followed Prince Shutra, but there was a dead end here. The campaign of artifact seekers found themselves near a sheer cliff, with no sign of a passage. The orc asked his master if he was sure they were going the right way. It didn't look like an entrance at all. But Shutra laughed. And who said that they were heading towards the entrance? Karak looked questioningly at the prince. The young man asked Caitlin if she could break through this rubble and hit them properly. The princess replied that she would try, but she had never had to destroy mountains before. Felicia wondered if the anvil that produced thunder was inside this rock. Shutra calculated that if they broke through this rubble, they would have to deal with the dungeon's guards. So if Caitlin breaks down this wall... Felicia suddenly said that Shutra is an idiot. How will she destroy it? With her bare hands? The prince probably thinks that Caitlin is some kind of battering ram. The young man is confused. But what should he do then? A bright clot of energy, like a vortex, began to spin in Felicia's hands. Felicia smiled. Ruin researchers always have an additional specialty in demolitions and explosives. She threw a magical charge at the place in the rock that Shutra had pointed out earlier. The girl stood near the rock and looked at the resulting effect. She really wanted to be the first to see what was in the rock. The rubble shook, small stones fell from the cliff, and a glow burst out from the cracks. Soon there was a deafening explosion. The rock began to move and collapse. A large opening appeared in front of the group of artifact seekers, and everyone looked inside with curiosity. Felicia stuttered that this simply couldn't be. She had seen what she had been looking for so long. Did they really find the anvil that produces thunder so surprisingly quickly? Karak asked what kind of dome it was. Caitlin replied that it looked like it was the last defense. There was an anvil inside. The orc was surprised. They would simply break it, but Shutra forbade it. That way they could damage the anvil. There must be a mechanism that will open it. Felicia looked thoughtfully at the treasured artifact. The dark elf ruler looked around carefully and thought that the statues around the dome looked strange. Of the 9 stone guards, only 3 hold weapons, while the other 6 do not. Caitlin agreed with her sister. Maybe the other statues should be given weapons. But it's not that simple. The weapons of these statues were made by dwarves, which means that other statues need the same weapons. So where can we get 6 dwarven swords? Suddenly Shutra said that it just so happened that he had 6 such swords. Ju couldn't use them because of his low level, so he kept them in his inventory. I never thought they would be useful in such a situation, but he was lucky. The prince said he picked them up while they were exploring the tunnels, and Karak was amazed that 6 of them fit into his bag. The prince laughed and told Karak to take the swords from him because they were heavy. Thanks to a lucky coincidence, the Seekers have now given each statue a sword. Soon all the stone guards were fully armed with dwarven swords. As soon as all the guards had weapons in their hands, a bright light burst out from their stone eyes. Everyone saw that the anvil under the dome flared with mana, and the artifact began to come to life. One of those present shouted that the dome over the anvil was slowly opening. Everyone held their breath as they looked at the amazing, magical object. The young man couldn't believe his eyes. Could they really have opened it? So this is the very same powerful anvil that gives birth to thunder, Felicia said thoughtfully. Judging by the records, one more thing needed to be done to activate the anvil. The girl told everyone to stand around the disc, taking positions at 3, 6, 9, and 12 o'clock. The Dark Elf Mistress explained that they would have to pour mana into the disc. Felicia will start first, then they will go clockwise. Gradually the amount of mana poured in should increase. The 6th princess ordered everyone to concentrate. They begin. And the first one directed her mana into the disc. Soon, everyone present began pouring mana into the magical artifact, and the huge anvil began to sparkle. Felicia shouted to her younger brother for Shutra to increase the flow of mana, and the young man obeyed. The girl asked those present not to lose concentration, and to continue to maintain the same level. The entire room was already filled with streams of mana. It seemed that even the air had thickened. The magical anvil began to glow with a bluish light. Something was clearly happening to it. Prince Shutra gritted his teeth. Maintaining such a powerful flow of mana was quite difficult. The player tensed up. He had to endure it, not break off. It seemed like the last of his strength was about to leave him. Suddenly, a stream of mana burst out of the stone room of the dungeon and rushed upward. Suddenly, Prince Shutra found himself in a completely different place, standing on the street, and the flow of mana had disappeared. Looking around, the young man saw a crowd of people around him, all of them standing motionless and looking in the same direction. The prince saw a strange clawed paw, and a monster landed next to the prince. Besides people, there were also animals and various monsters here. but no one was at odds with each other. The young man asked in confusion what it was, and then he heard a thunderous voice. Someone was addressing his vassals. The prince raised his head. The voice came from somewhere above. He wondered who it was. All those present, as well as Shutra, obediently raised their heads and listened. The young man's mouth dropped open in surprise. Could this really be the one he was thinking of? But how was that possible? A huge black dragon hovered in the crimson sky above the crowd of people, animals, and monsters. He told the young man that he must protect the nest of the great dragon Enkidu. The dragon ordered Shutra to become a guardian who would stand between the kingdom of demons and the kingdom of humans. The giant dragon flew very close. It seemed that the lava from its eyes and mouth was about to burn the prince. Shutra opened his eyes, breathing heavily. He lay on the stone floor near the magic anvil. The young man's thoughts were confused. He tried to understand what it was and what it all meant. It was definitely a black dragon. Could he really have seen the stone dragon Enkidu? Felicia Dumbledore asked the worried Prince Shutra if he had seen it too. A huge black dragon must have appeared to him, with lava flowing through its veins. Karak said that he saw it too, this dragon, which meant that they all had the same vision. Felicia sighed, apparently not yet sure what this all meant. Felicia Dumbledore looked at the magical anvil with a sigh. It constantly beckoned to the girl. The elf stepped forward confidently, saying that they would surely find out the truth using the anvil. The girl slowly walked into the magic circle filled with mana and carefully approached the huge anvil. She reached out and touched the ancient magical artifact, and suddenly someone else's dark mana began to swirl nearby. Suddenly, the entire space around the anvil was filled with a lilac glow with flashes of dark, powerful mana. Felicia clenched her teeth. She couldn't escape this powerful whirlwind. Her hand felt like it was stuck to an anvil. The ruler of the Dark Elves felt that she was rapidly losing her strength. The magical artifact was destroying her. Unable to bear it, the girl screamed. Ju realized that something had gone wrong and immediately rushed to help Felicia. Noticing that the youngest prince was approaching her, the elf warned him to stop. It was dangerous. But the young man had already grabbed his older sister by the shoulders and tried to tear her away from the anvil. Now the bodies of both Felicia and Shutra glowed with the light of the anvil, and they screamed in pain. Caitlin and Karak called out loudly to them, but they did not dare approach the dangerous magical object themselves. Prince Shutra Ignis screamed loudly. He felt that his body was once again being carried away into an unknown space. Powerful streams of mana from the stone dragon Enkidu swirled around the young man, and he heard that this was conquest. The dragon's test befalls those who have not been granted permission. But true conquest is the manifestation of true power over all beings in this world. The treasure hunters were surprised to see that Felicia and Shutru had disappeared from the room. Caitlin and Karak looked around in confusion, trying to figure out where the prince and princess had gone. Soon the anvil stopped glowing, and Prince Shutra appeared near the artifact, holding a strange glowing object in his hands. Looking closely, everyone saw that the young man was holding something that looked like a small hammer. Shutra looked very strange. The color of his mana changed, and his left eye became like a dragon's and burned brightly. Meanwhile, the camp of the demon army in the gorge lived in anticipation of the return of the prince and two princesses. Enemy scouts watched the camp from the cliff. Red orcs were rushing to finish off their opponents. The Red Lightning Tribe scout peered through his telescope, counting how many enemies were left alive. He laughed merrily. Oh, fools. They thought that if they hid here, the red orcs would not find them. After reporting to the tribal leader, the scout asked what they would do, and whether the commander would give the order to attack the camp immediately. If the Red Lightning Tribe's commander-in-chief, Lord Yakujan, orders it, the warriors will wipe the camp off the face of the earth. The mighty Red Orc looked back. Behind him stood a huge army, supported by terrible monsters. He ordered everyone to get ready. They would soon destroy those demons who were still alive after the last battle. The orcs patrolled the camp, unaware that they were about to be attacked by an army of rebels. Suddenly they heard a strange noise. Raising their heads, the camp guards were stunned. A stream of fireballs flew straight at the orcs from above. There were so many of them that it was impossible to hide in the narrow gorge. The fiery charges fired by the monstrous mammoths reached their target, and explosions were heard throughout the camp. The flames engulfed most of the military camp, and the orcs tried to avoid death and prepare for an attack. The Demon King's warriors saw that a crowd of enemies was already rushing towards them. This time the rebels had the numerical superiority. The eyes of the red orcs were burning. They were thirsty for reprisals against their enemies after so many defeats. Chris Moonlight came out of the tent and saw the enemies rapidly approaching. The prince was terrified. He cursed irritably. Now neither Caitlin nor Felicia are in the camp. At this rate they will all be destroyed here. Yakujan watched from the cliff as his enemies rushed about under fire, and his subordinates advanced in unison. The leader laughed cheerfully. The stupid demons climbed where they shouldn't have, and that's how they got this result. It serves them right. There were magicians standing on the rocks around the battlefield. Yakuzan ordered to finish with the rest, to kill everyone. And suddenly the leader noticed that his hand was engulfed in a strange glow, and he began to shake. Yakuzan's eyes widened in surprise, wondering why his hand had stopped moving. What was happening to him? Suddenly, everyone noticed that the same strange purple glow had enveloped the swamp mammoths. The monsters stopped attacking the Demon Lord's army and obediently froze, obeying some call. The red orcs opened their fanged mouths in surprise, their allies turning against them. Now the swamp mammoths attacked the Red Lightning Tribe's army with firebolts. The red orcs scattered in terror, trying to hide from the fiery attacks of the swamp mammoths. Yakuzan watched what was happening from a cliff. He could not understand why the situation had changed so abruptly. The red-skinned chief stuttered and asked what was going on, why the swamp mammoths were attacking them and not the demons. Chris also watched with surprise at the sudden changes on the battlefield. His warriors had already gone on the offensive. The seventh prince remained silent and frowned, trying to understand what had happened. And then an idea flashed through his mind, but this simply couldn't be, because he considered this idea stupid. But there can only be one explanation, that the group that went into the mountains did find an anvil. All the seekers looked in surprise at the youngest prince and the strange object in his hands. Lifting the iridescent hammer higher, Shutra asked in confusion what it was. Felicia Dumbledore explained that the boy was holding a thunderhammer, an addition to the anvil. The exhausted dark elf ruler leaned on the girl and said with a sigh, "It seems that Enkidu has chosen Shutra." The young man was confused. But why did the stone dragon choose him? After all, he is the youngest. Felicia asked her younger brother irritably why he was standing there. She needed to use the hammer to save their army. Ju looked closely at the thunderhammer. Surprisingly, now it had enormous magical power in its hands. The stone dragon Akidu's mana showed him how to wield the hammer he had received. He remembered the vision. The dragon spoke, conquer, subdue, and force to obey. In the young man's head it sounded like conquest as the true manifestation of real power. Then the prince remembered how to use an anvil to create thunder. He swung his hammer and hit the anvil. Ju decided to start with the swamp mammoths, as the most dangerous allies of the Red Lightning Tribe. After the hammer struck, a huge stream of magic burst out of the anvil and rushed upward. This current engulfed the swamp mammoths on the battlefield, and forced them to turn around and submit to the will of Prince Shutra. The monsters immediately attacked their recent allies, directing a stream of firebolts at them. The red orcs ran away, screaming in horror. No one understood what was happening, why the mammoths suddenly began to attack them. Noticing the panic in the enemy ranks, the commander-in-chief of the demon army immediately took advantage of the moment to attack. General Bandel and his loyal warriors attacked their frightened opponents with lightning speed. He realized that, judging by the way the swamp mammoths were attacking the Red Lightning Tribe, it seemed like the prince and princess had succeeded. The general inspired his soldiers by shouting that their time had come. They must kill all the rebels and not let anyone escape. Inspired by the unexpected advantage, the warriors of the demonic army quickly killed the toothy lizardmen. Now it's time to fight face to face with the red orcs, who have been hiding behind their monster allies for a long time. Yakuzan still stood on the rock and watched, not daring to go down and join his army. He asked the approaching magician what the hell this was, why the swamp mammoths were behaving like this. The magician didn't know who could possess such a quantity of mana. The Red Lightning Tribe's mage insisted that they should retreat now and wait for another chance. But then an explosion was heard behind the interlocutors, and someone very strong and fast jumped onto the rock. It turned out that the seventh demon prince, Chris Moonlight, had flown up to the leader of the Red Orcs. Yakuzan looked at the young lycanthrope lord and the demon lord's son in confusion. Chris frowned and said, "It looks like the Red Lightning Tribe is finished." The prince told the chief that if they surrendered, he promised them a quick death, and Yakuzan cursed in response. Swinging a huge battle axe at Chris, the chieftain shouted that he would tear the boy to pieces. The prince's eyes sparkled, and the indomitable spirit of the true god of beasts awoke within him. With the speed of lightning, Chris rushed towards the enemy, using the hand-to-hand combat art of the beast god. Yakuzan did not even have time to realize how he died. The stunned tribal mages saw with horror that their leader's head had been severed from his body and was lying at their feet. They ran away shouting that their leader was dead, that Mr. Yakuzan had been killed. The magicians continued to shout, calling for everyone to save themselves. Chris sighed with relief. Now he just needed to deal with the rest. Moonlight remembered Shutra and Felicia. If it weren't for those two, they would have been in serious trouble. Chris looked around thoughtfully. He really hoped that nothing had happened to them. A large screen appeared in front of the group of anvil seekers, showing the battle that was taking place in the gorge. Karak asked in surprise if this was really what the swamp mammoths were seeing now. Felicia confirmed that with the anvil, all the treasure guardians could be controlled. In any case, with the help of the anvil, the Red Lightning tribe will be defeated. Felicia sighed wearily, and the words died on her lips. The girl was rapidly losing strength. Suddenly she swayed, her legs gave way, and the princess began to fall. Everyone asked the girl with concern what was wrong with her. She, gritting her teeth, answered that she just needed a little rest, and she would be fine. In this case, it was decided to quickly find a place to rest and spend the night in the ruins. And then everyone noticed that Prince Shutra had disappeared. No one saw where this boy had gone. Ju went outside and sighed with relief. He could finally take a break. The game had informed him that his level had increased. The young man was surprised. His level had increased quite a lot. Perhaps it was because he controlled Enkidu's relic. And then he saw a strange message. The statuses indicated that the level of the conquest skill had also increased. Even the Under the Royal Banner skill has improved, along with the increase in the conquest level. Ju didn't fully understand all of this, but if his main skill becomes stronger, it's clearly only a plus for him. The player noticed that he had a new skill, King's Knights. Judging by the name, it seems to be a summoning type skill. And then the young man heard someone calling him. It seemed his companions had discovered his disappearance. A worried Caitlin Moonlight appeared through the forest thickets, calling loudly for Shutra. Ju remembered indeed he had left without saying a word to anyone, and his companions were probably worried. The youngest prince, without having time to apologize, received a powerful punch from Caitlin. Scratching the bruised area, he apologized to the girl, and she angrily asked what he was thinking, disappearing so suddenly. The sister suggested going back. They would have to spend the night here. The prince was surprised. They wouldn't go back straight away. That was the original plan, but Caitlin said they had a problem. The young man was surprised. What other problem could there be, since they had dealt with everything perfectly? Caitlin explained that when Shutra left, Felicia lost consciousness, and they couldn't bring her back to her senses. Perhaps the whole thing is that she was recently freed from captivity, where she became weak and apparently overloaded herself too much. Before passing out, Felicia said she just needed to rest, but no one knew when she would wake up. And without her, they can't even summon the phantom mounts. So for now, they need to monitor Felicia's condition here. The prince nodded his head affirmatively, thinking with concern that everything would be fine with Felicia. Night fell upon the forested mountains that hid the ancient ruins, and the ruler of the Dark Elves never woke up. A group of seekers of an ancient artifact settled down for the night in the room where the anvil was located. Unlike his companions, Ju could not sleep. He felt surprisingly cheerful and sat thoughtfully in the hall. I wonder if his stamina was fully restored just because he leveled up. The young man had a strange feeling. He didn't feel tired at all, which meant he just needed to wait until the morning. And then Ju saw a door. He hadn't noticed it before. And then it dawned on him. These were ancient ruins. This means that the weapons and treasures of the stone dragon Enkidu must be hidden in this dungeon. Of course, on the way to the treasury you will probably encounter traps and guards. That's always the case. But in the hands of the young man, the thunder hammer of the stone dragon Enkidu himself shimmered. And then the thought flashed through Ju's mind. What if he is the master of these ancient ruins? The power of the anvil only works here, but it is in these ruins that it becomes absolute power. So it turns out that Ju now has complete carte blanche over this entire place and the treasures that are here. With his muscular arms and legs spread out, Karak slept peacefully, occasionally snoring sleepily. He quietly shook Karak, trying not to wake the rest of their small squad. When the orc finally woke up, the prince smiled and invited him to go somewhere with him. Karaku didn't really like this idea. Was it really okay to just break into someone's treasury like that? And if something goes wrong, what will they do? But the young man reassured his companion. He is the ruler of this place. There is nothing to worry about. Ju reminded Karak that these were ruins. There should definitely be good weapons here. But when they opened the door, Karak was stunned. Right at the threshold, they were met by a very formidable guard. The orc told the prince that there was a huge monster lying there, and they definitely couldn't handle it. Ju explained that it was a guardian golem in the form of a griffin. Karak might think that it was simply an incredibly powerful monster. If they had just rushed in here thoughtlessly, they could have died immediately. But Karak was in a hurry to get away from the griffin. The orc gasped as he passed by. What a size, he would prefer not to fight such a monster. The young man laughed, and Karak, however, was a coward. The orc grumbled that he was just being cautious. Opening the next door, the prince and Karak found themselves in the treasury, and the orc was delighted. Karak showed the young man his find, saying that it was simply amazing armor. Ju agreed. It looked pretty good. Looking closely at the orc's find, the player felt a subtle mana. This could only mean one thing. Karak had magical armor in his hands. The prince asked his companion if he wanted to take the armor for himself, but he couldn't believe his ears. Was it really possible? The young man smiled. It was still too big for him. And a pleased Karak thanked the prince for such a gift. Ju's attention was drawn to a small chest and gold coins lying on the table. He took one of them. What is it? Ancient gold coins with a dragon. First, it is better to put everything useful in the inventory. The young man told Karak to grab everything of value that he could carry with him. Ju looked around carefully. Surely what was here was not the most valuable. The player dropped to one knee and opened a large chest, wondering what was inside. And then he heard an unusual sound, as if someone was calling the prince to go further. The door in the depths of the treasury quietly opened and mana leaked out. The young man asked in confusion what was happening. It looks like there's a cache there with something more valuable than in the main room. The player's eyes gleamed. It seemed like there was definitely something there he needed to check. Leaving the chest, the young man entered the half-open door and walked down a long corridor. After passing through the corridor, the prince found himself in a huge room, many times larger than the treasury. Suddenly, Ju heard someone call out to him. He looked around in confusion, but there was definitely no one in the room. Right in front of him, above the pedestal, hung a huge glove. The young man stared at it. He recognized the mana that surrounded this mysterious object. Even though it was the first time Ju had seen this mana in real life, the name simply appeared in his head. It was Enkidu's mana. And then the player realized that in front of him was the glove of the stone dragon Enkidu the Shaker. This is truly an amazing find, worth all the treasures hidden in the previous room. The prince, as if enchanted, looked at the glove of the great ruler of the past, the stone dragon Enkidu. Suddenly the young man heard the glove addressing him as a brave conquering knight. He couldn't believe that Enkidu's shaker glove was calling him to it. Ju boldly stepped forward and climbed onto the pedestal where the ancient dragon artifact was kept. He reached out his hand to Enkidu's glove, intending to try on the powerful item. The game reported that he was under-leveled, had insufficient mana, physical and mental strength for the item. The young man was disappointed. It turned out he couldn't wear this glove yet. Suddenly the glove began to glow. Enkidu's mana began to swirl, and an unknown voice said that Ju was allowed to wear the item. The game reported that the shaker recognized the player as its master and allowed the use of the item. The stone dragon's glove glowed with golden light, and a message came that the user of the shaker had been changed to Shutra. The young man again reached out his right hand to the glove. For some reason he had an irresistible desire to try it on. Suddenly, Enkidu's glove appeared on the prince's hand, and he exclaimed in surprise, immediately feeling an explosion of power inside him. He looked at his hand in surprise, as Enkidu's glove recognized him as its owner. The game notified Ju that his strength had been increased by 10, and his mana and stamina had increased by that amount. The player was surprised. Wow, he just put on this glove, and his stats immediately increased so much. Ju smiled, which meant that once he gained a level, his stats would increase even more. It was simply unbelievable. The young man decided to put Enkidu's glove in his inventory for now. Everything is going even better than he expected when he got into this game. The item disappeared from the player's hand and ended up in the inventory. And then he heard Karak's surprised voice behind him. He asked the prince what just happened. Ju jumped in surprise. He asked Karak how long he had been standing there. The orc replied that he saw everything. The glove appeared out of nowhere. The young man cursed silently. If others found out about the inventory, he would be in trouble. Karak, looking at the confused face of his master, realized that if people found out about these miracles, the prince would have problems. The orc reassured the young man that whatever it was would remain between them, and Karak swore that he would take this secret with him to the grave. The prince's companions said that they had collected everything they needed in the treasury and could return. Karak looked around in confusion. The hiding place seemed somehow creepy to him, and he had a bad feeling. The prince agreed with the orc that it would be better for them to return for now, before their companions woke up. They left the hiding place and again walked through the treasury, glittering with valuables. Suddenly, the young man's attention was drawn to one object. He chuckled thoughtfully and stopped. Telling Karak to wait for him for a minute, the prince ran towards the object. The orc grumbled, "Well, what happened this time?" The prince asked his companion if he couldn't see that Karak was confused about what his highness was talking about. The young man shouted cheerfully that there was exactly what they needed right now. Felicia took a couple of sips from the glowing green vial she had found in Shutra's treasury. At that very moment, a life-giving green light filled the room, and the ruler of the Dark Elves was healed. The princess sighed with relief. She finally felt strength in her body. The young man exclaimed joyfully. Felicia woke up. The elf looked at Shutra in surprise. Caitlin sat down next to her sister and took her hand. and she asked the girl what happened. The 8th princess, wiping away a tear of joy, said that Shutra had restored Felicia's consciousness with the help of a mana restoration potion. Felicia was very surprised where it came from, and how it ended up with the youngest prince. Shutra asked the dark elf ruler with a smile. She seemed to have forgotten where they were. Felicia whispered, "Yes, they are in ancient ruins, and here you can find anything." The prince replied that everything was exactly so, and one should not forget that he, Shutra, was the ruler of these ruins. He told Felicia not to worry about anything and to rest. When she woke up, her mana would be fully restored. Suddenly the prince heard Felicia quietly say thank you to him. He was extremely surprised. It was the first time she thanked him. The girl was very embarrassed and blushed. She did not expect that she would be saved by her weakest brother, whom everyone considered worthless. A bright sun rose over the mountains. A new day had dawned. Felicia was full of strength, and the company could return to camp. Everything was calm in the gorge. There was no trace left of the recent bloody battle. General Bandel joyfully welcomed the prince and 2 princesses who had saved them in the battle. The commander-in-chief was cheerful and exclaimed with a laugh that he knew the prince and princess would succeed. Suddenly everyone heard a slight cough. Chris Moonlight was standing a little to the side. Chris felt a little uneasy because he didn't approve of the anvil idea, calling it stupid. Usually cheerful and welcoming. This time the 7th demon prince coughed awkwardly and chose his words carefully. He finally told Felicia that it was spectacular when the swamp mammoths attacked the red orcs. The dark elf queen shook her head and casually replied that it was nothing. Ju watched the behavior of these two with a smile, and he chuckled as he thought about how warmly they communicated. Chris added that Felicia should rest while they cleaned up. Shutra asked in surprise, "Wasn't it all over yet?" Moonlight explained that the Red Lightning tribe still remained, and would return to combat in 2 weeks at the most. Shutra thoughtfully remarked that this meant they could definitely rest for half a month. But Catelyn whispered mysteriously in the 9th prince's ear that he would not have any rest. The young man looked at the 8th demon princess in surprise, wondering what she was planning. And Catelyn cheerfully whispered to Shutra that they still had unfinished business. Chris, along with the general and the army, went off to search for the enemy tribe, while Catelyn and Shutra found a suitable site in the thicket. The girl decided to return to teaching her younger brother hand-to-hand combat with animals. Catelyn's training was incredibly tough, and at first the young man was constantly getting hit. The princess told Shutra to pull himself together and concentrate, otherwise things would get bad. Having received several blows, he lay on the ground, his whole body shaking, but Catelyn demanded that he get up. The young man groaned. He was ready for the beast's hand-to-hand combat training. But this was too cruel. When Catelyn talked about unfinished business, she was referring specifically to training. For the first 5 days, the prince felt as if he was being methodically beaten. It wasn't until a week later that he began to see Catelyn's blows. She moved so fast. And so the 11th day of beast hand-to-hand combat training arrived. Now Shutra no longer fell like a sack from every blow, but began to strike back himself. Catelyn smiled and told her little brother that he was starting to get the hang of it. The young man smiled. It was about time after so many days of merciless beatings. Perhaps due to special training, Ju's beast aura and hand-to-hand combat skills increased to 5. A pleased Catelyn congratulated her brother. He would soon be ready for the art of hand-to-hand combat of the beast god. The prince was very happy. Catelyn admitted that she was impressed. They had never seen anyone learn so quickly. The satisfied young man smiled. Finally, he would learn the secret technique of the lycanthropes, the art of hand-to-hand combat of the beast god. Taking Shutra by the hands, the girl said that now she would teach him a new way of using aura. She asked her brother not to miss anything and to listen to her very carefully. The young man looked at Catelyn very carefully with a smile, not missing a single word. She held her brother's hands and seemed to share knowledge with him, their auras united into one. A powerful stream of the demon prince and princess's aura raged around them. Shutra closed his eyes and realized that he could feel Catelyn's aura as if it were his own. Catelyn's aura guides him. It's like a beast's hand-to-hand combat, but a little different. He feels the depth of the aura more and more. Aura is a life force. Reaching its peak, it becomes similar to the power of the soul in conquest. To conquer and compel submission requires ferocious, overwhelming force. Falling into a feeling of weightlessness, the young man wondered if this was really an aura. The prince's consciousness returned to the forest, where he and Catelyn had been training for the 2nd week. In-game notifications have appeared that Ju's beast melee and aura levels have increased. Catelyn exclaimed enthusiastically that this was simply incredible. Shutra is very talented. He succeeded on the first try, and the game informed him that the young man had acquired the skill of the beast god's hand-to-hand combat art. The player looked at his flaming hand. The shaker and the hand-to-hand combat art of the beast god can give incredible results. The prince clenched his fist sharply, causing an explosive wave of aura concentrated in his hands. The leaves rustled as they swirled around the young man, and a magical whirlwind continued to swirl in the clearing. The game informed Ju that his level had been raised to 14, and he smiled with satisfaction. The young man's eyes flashed, and he exclaimed, "Now it's definitely begun." General Bandel was secretly watching this scene from behind a tree. The commander-in-chief did not understand the 9th Demon Prince's last statement. The next morning, the demon military camp was, as always, quiet and peaceful. Shutra and Caitlin were having breakfast in the main tent, and then the young man remembered a question that had long interested him. He asked the girl if he could find out something about Felicia Dumbledore. Caitlin became wary. Shutra asked her if she could explain what was going on between her and Chris. Felicia was supposed to be a key ally for Ju, just like Chris, but if their relationship is strained, there could be problems. Shutra noted thoughtfully that it couldn't be said that everything was bad between Chris and Felicia, but they were distant. Caitlin replied, not saying that something had happened between them. The young man asked, "What then?" The girl said she didn't know for sure, but she thought it had something to do with Chris and Sylvan. She added that Chris was not here, but there was no point in saying Sylvan's name out loud. Shutra said he was just surprised. Felicia's twin, Sylvan Doomblade, was a real problem when Ju played as Zephyr. Shutra asked Caitlin if there was a conflict between Chris and Sylvan. At this time, a very pleased Chris entered the tent. He was glad that he found his brother and sister here. They asked him in surprise what had happened, and why he had returned to camp so early. But Chris smiled and told them to get going. Everything had happened faster than anyone thought, so they were leaving today. Shutra looked at his older brother in confusion, and asked where they were heading. Chris laughed. Was Shutra seriously asking, of course, to report that everything was done? As he bid farewell to the princes and princesses, General Bandel said that they had done a great job this time. As he parted from Shutra, the giant smiled and said that he was looking forward to the day when they would meet the 9th prince again. The young man cheerfully replied that he too would be very glad to see the commander-in-chief again. Chris was in high spirits and urged his younger brother on, saying that it was time for them to go. Now their path lay to the castle of the Demon King for an audience with the ruler himself, their father. The Demon Lord's huge, majestic castle occupied an impressive area and consisted of many buildings. In the huge hall in front of the majestic throne, many courtiers usually gathered, and audiences were held there. On the dais stood a majestic throne, on which the all-powerful Demon King usually sat proudly. The way back to the Demon King's castle is quite simple. You first need to reach a teleportation circle that can make long jumps. Then you need to use transfer magic to go straight to the Demon King's castle. The estimated time to the nearest teleportation circle was 3 days. This journey did not include stops in taverns. In other words, he, Chris, Felicia, and Caitlin were about to spend another night in the open air. Sitting by the fire, Ju thought about the Demon King's castle. Just think, they would arrive there tomorrow. The young man was a little worried. Currently, the Demon King's castle is divided into 3 main factions. The second prince Zephyr Ragnaros, the second son of the Demon King, and his greatest enemy. The second faction is led by the first prince of demons, Baikal Ragnaros, and the third faction is led by the 4th princess, Anastasia Nekrion. In the struggle for the throne, birth order did not matter. The one with more achievements and who was more capable occupied the highest position. Baikal and Zephyr were half-brothers. Their abilities were almost equal. They inherited the blood of the Dragon Clan and possessed enormous strength. However, if one had to choose a successor, the more calm-tempered Baikal would probably be the better choice. Not that the choice meant anything at all, because after that day everything would change. Therefore, Ju must be prepared for anything, knowing the storyline of this game. First, he needs to level up so he can fully wield the shaker, and he also needed to make the most of his newfound power. And then the young man remembered the King's Knight skill. The game immediately announced that a knightly order had been created, and Ju was confused, as he had thought it was just another summoning-type skill. Looking at the screen, Ju saw that there were buffs, knight training, even summoning. If this skill is so good at the first level, then how strong will it become later? And then Karak called out to him. The orc was indignant. Why the prince was not sleeping again? He needed to sleep in order to leave early in the morning. The young man laughed and said that Karak, as always, appeared just in time. Turning to the faithful orc, the prince asked him if he would like to conduct an experiment with him. Karak shuddered and asked the master in fear what other experiment. In the night forest, under the light of a bright moon, Prince Shutra summoned his first King's Knight, the mighty orc warrior Karak. The player's hands flashed with the blade from the treasury, and he spoke the words of summoning, following the game's instructions. Placing his sword on Karak's shoulder, the prince said that he appointed him as his knight. After the knighting ceremony, the orc was engulfed in a glow and his level increased. Karak told the prince that after the ritual, he had a strange feeling. It seems his devotion to Prince Shutra has grown even greater, as Karak has now become a knight commander of the 24th level. The young man was very pleased with the result, he reassured his first knight. This is how it should be. The orc looked at his powerful arms in confusion. It was good, of course, that he had become stronger, but he couldn't understand what it was at all. The prince asked the worried servant if Karak didn't want to become the most powerful orc in the world. Shutra declared that he would raise Karak into the most powerful emperor of the orcs. He would be able to fight on equal terms even with dragons. Karak looked at his master with concern and asked if the prince was probably ill. The next day, the company of princes and princesses safely reached the tower with the teleporter. Having climbed up the tower, they entered a secret room and found themselves in front of a teleportation circle. Chris noticed that his younger brother Shutra was a little scared and cheerfully encouraged the young man. The 9th prince smiled and thanked his elder brother for his support. He boldly stepped into the circle with the magical writings. The others were already in place. Felicia cast a spell, and at that very moment the circle began to glow. Ju shuddered and clenched his fists. He had used this thing many times in the game, but this was the first time he had actually found himself in a teleport. A bright light flashed above the tower and a column, similar to a powerful electrical discharge, shot into the sky. The young man was blinded by a bright white light. The teleporter had started working, and Ju was confused about what it was. He suddenly felt like he was flying somewhere at great speed, and Ju screamed in fear. Gritting his teeth, the young man screamed for them to stop, but the space around him was spinning at an unprecedented speed. With another loud cry, Prince Shutra somersaulted through the air. Coming to his senses, Ju saw that he was kneeling on the teleportation circle, and the others were looking at him intently. Caitlin asked Shutra solicitously if everything was okay with him, but the young man had already pulled himself together and replied that everything was fine. Felicia was the first to exit the teleport and headed towards the ladies of the court who were greeting her. They began to chirp that they had been waiting for her, and that Lady Felicia was as beautiful as ever. Ju saw how the 6th princess, surrounded by care and flattery, smiled contentedly. The young man had a feeling that this was some kind of idol fan club, probably Felicia's servants and subordinates. Chris and Caitlin were also immediately surrounded by courtiers, who showered them with compliments and asked how they were doing. Shutra smiled bitterly. No one greeted him. Only the laughter and whispers of the courtiers could be heard. The girls whispered behind his back, pointing their fingers at the 9th prince. It was unpleasant. Now it became clear to Ju that this was roughly his position in the Demon King's castle. The young man sighed and smiled. Well, no big deal. He expected that. Turning to the saddened Karak, the prince asked if he was ready to act. Shutra cheerfully told the orc that they were starting to gradually change everything right now. After arriving at the Demon King's castle, the princes and princesses went to their residences to rest and tidy themselves up. The room in which the 9th Prince Shutra Ignus and his faithful Karak found themselves seemed uninhabited. It looked more like a barn with all sorts of junk covered in cobwebs and dirt. The orcs said that they could stay here. The young man sighed. At least there was a room for them, and that was good. The official events start tomorrow. Until then they can do whatever they want. Ju felt like they were left to rot, but then someone knocked softly on their door. A girl named Flora Semiromik from the castle's property management office entered and politely greeted the prince. The young man was surprised what brought an employee from such an institution to this hole. She informed His Highness that his level of public service had risen, and he now had the right to choose a new residence. Then Isabella from the Public Services Department came to the prince to meet with His Highness. The delighted Shutra decided to immediately obtain a new residence and contacted the relevant department of the castle administration. Isabella explained that thanks to his latest victory, his merit level had risen to level 5. Thanks to this, the prince now has access to more objects, and his maintenance has been increased from 5 gold to 500. The girl enthusiastically added that Shutra was the first prince to achieve such a result in his very first mission. The young man asked to be shown the available residences immediately. Karak was shocked by the news, his fanged mouth open as he looked at Prince Shutra's new residence. In front of them was a luxurious estate, surrounded by a twisted wrought iron fence and cozy grounds. The new owner was greeted by a polite maid, who said that His Highness had arrived earlier than expected. From this day forward, Flora Sevensword will serve the 9th prince with honor, acting as his headmaid or butler. Karak was confused. She was from a real estate agency, but the prince cheerfully said that he hired her using his merit points. The orc looked at his master in surprise and noticed that the prince had recently started talking nonsense. The next day, The princes and princesses who had returned from the mission prepared to appear before the Demon King. A frightened Carrack said with embarrassment that he constantly felt like he needed to go to the toilet. Apparently it was just from nerves. Shutra, Ignis, and Carrack dressed in festive attire before the audience. They were nervous. The 9th prince turned around and saw Caitlin, who exclaimed that Shutra looked amazing. Felicia asked her sister who she thought chose everyone's outfits. Caitlin said that Felicia was the best, and Felicia smiled contentedly, saying that all her hard work had paid off. The 8th princess winked cheerfully at her little brother and said that the suit suited him very well. The young man blushed slightly, thanked the girls, and noted that they also looked wonderful. Felicia snorted contentedly. Well, of course they look great. They are demon princesses after all. At this time, Chris joined the campaign and asked Shutra. This was his first audience. The Lord of the Lycanthropes said with a smile that today Shutra is a star. He must show himself to everyone in the Demon King's castle. The 9th prince also smiled and said that this was exactly what he intended to do. The doors of the throne room opened, and the princes and princesses were invited in. There may be those who think Shutra was just lucky, but soon all eyes will be on the 9th prince. The cream of the demonic kingdom gathered in the huge throne room. The princes and princesses walked confidently down the red carpet leading to the king's throne, with Chris walking first. Following the eldest Moonlight were his sisters Caitlin and Felicia. Shutra brought up the rear, the young man confident that soon everyone would take a fresh look at the worthless prince they had once rejected. Bending one knee, the 4 children of the Demon Lord stood before their king and father. The broad-shouldered 7th prince introduced himself to the assembled group, saying that he was Chris Moonlight. He respectfully said that he was appearing before the great ruler of the Demon Kingdom. On the throne sat the mighty, invincible Demon King Mithra, causing tremors in half of this world. The king's secretary said that they would now report on the achievements of the princes and princesses. Ju remembered that according to the game's plot, the Demon King Mithra was the father of all the children of the kings of the demon lands. The young man raised his head and looked closely at the powerful ruler. Mithra is someone who should never be underestimated in the Demon King's castle. Compared to him, the 9th prince looked like a small, weak insect at his feet. Standing near the throne, Ju suddenly felt the pressure of incredible force on himself. He just stands in front of Mithra, and it feels like he's about to crumble into tiny pieces. And suddenly, a golden-haired blonde appeared before the player's mind's eye. She extended her hand to him and filled him with golden light. She reminded the young man of the conquest, and instantly he felt that same golden light and strength inside. The girl said that Shutra must cope with Mithra's gaze, for he is also a king. The prince must overcome the suffocating pressure and bend it to his will. The young man clenched his teeth, concentrated, and tried to overcome the Demon King's gaze and pressure. Suddenly, Shutra's aura flared with golden light and pushed back the oppressive aura of King Mithra. Now the 9th prince's eyes were glowing with golden light, and his lips were stubbornly pressed together. He felt the true power of conquest. The Demon King looked at his youngest son with a smile. Unexpectedly, the Lord addressed the 9th prince by name, which had never happened before. Felicia Dumbledore's eyes widened in surprise at what Shutra had done so well. Chris and Caitlin Moonlight gaped in surprise. Neither of them had ever been given a part like that. The youngest prince raised his head and looked at his royal father in bewilderment. He smiled and added that he was looking forward to his future achievements. The courtiers began to whisper about what was going on. The king had never before called any prince or princess by name during an audience. Why would His Majesty mention the 9th prince, who had been almost unnoticed before? The king said this in a completely casual manner, but it was a statement that no one had ever heard from a demon king. And this made such a statement invaluable and immediately singled out the 9th prince. Shutra calmly replied to the Demon King that he would do his utmost to live up to His Majesty's expectations. Early in the morning, an excited Carrack woke the prince, telling him to get up quickly. Stretching on the bed, the young man asked what had happened. It was still so early. The orc shouted that a letter had arrived from the Public Services Department. Ju opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. Why would the Public Service Department write to him? But after running his eyes over the first lines, the young man fell silent. This was truly serious. Carrack excitedly asked what was written there. The prince was confused as to how he should react to this. Shutra answered the orc with a smile. It seemed that the Demon King himself, that is, his father, had entrusted him with a personal task. The 9th prince decided to consult with the Moonlights, and went to their residence to visit their allies. Chris read that this is a mission to pacify a herd of Cassia, destroying monsters. Which means, Caitlin asked, Shutra is going to the Plains of Anger. Shutra asked if this was where the centaurs lived, Caitlin confirmed. She and Chris had once gone there to train. Chris said that the Cassia are pacified almost every year. He would go with him. but they have their own schedule. They are sure that Shutra can handle it himself. The seventh prince warned the little one that he now needed to be very careful. After that audience, both potential friends and enemies will begin to pay attention to him. Some of the courtiers will try to get closer to him. Others will treat him with caution. In a situation of increased attention, Shutra will have to pay attention to a lot of things. Ju knew about it. Even Zephyr said that he was never called by name during the audience. Chris reminded him once again that if Shutra needed help, he could feel free to contact him, and the young man thanked his brother. Chris told Shutra to visit Felicia before leaving. She said she had prepared something for him. Finally, all preparations for the new mission were completed, and the prince and Karak set out on their journey. Felicia met them near the teleporter and said that in order to travel through Centaur territory, they needed good legs. Stroking the little dragon, the dark elf offered Shutra to take it, and the young man enthusiastically thanked his sister. But that's not all. Felicia handed her younger brother a magic pendant. A dark elf tear glistened on his palm. Felicia gave him one of the sacred relics of the dark elves. Ju was very surprised. Usually in the game you can only get it by killing Felicia herself. The girl said that the dark elves are a proud people. They do not forget either good or evil. Suddenly, Felicia hugged and held her little brother close, telling him to take care of himself and come back safe and sound. The young man was frightened. He never thought that proud Felicia Dumbledore could be like this. Suddenly the girl pushed Shutra away from herself, realizing that she had given in to her emotions too much. The princess looked down and said it was okay. She must have realized how awkward it was. Having stepped into the teleporter along with the gifted dragons, the young man waved his hand to Felicia and wished her well. Shutra cast a transfer spell and the teleport started working. Felicia looked after her brother with tenderness. Raising her head, the ruler of the Dark Elves whispered that she would wait for a new meeting. A few seconds later, Prince Shutra, Karak, and 2 elven dragons found themselves in a tower on the Enger Plains. The bright glow disappeared, and the travelers realized that they had already arrived. Karak asked the ruler in confusion if they were already there. The young man answered that it seemed so. As soon as they exited the teleport, a female voice was heard from behind. The girl greeted the 9th prince. The girl introduced herself. She was Karma, a ranger. She would be their guide. Shutra replied that he was pleased to meet him. He noticed that Karma's upper body was like that of a human, and his lower body was like that of an animal. So, in front of them is a satyr. Karma said that it is a great honor for her to accompany Lord Shutra. The young man suggested heading straight to the scene of the events so as not to waste time. Karma pushed off the ground with her strong hoof-like legs and rushed forward. It's at least 2 days' journey from the tower to the Centaur settlement, and Karma suggested going with minimal stops. She asked if there were any other soldiers with the prince. Shutra replied that the mission had come suddenly, so for now it was just the 2 of them. Karma said they would have centaurs on their side, so there would be no numerical superiority. Ju realized it would be a massive battle. In that case, the real problem will be the weapons. It's something like a mounted fight. Perhaps a spear would be best. And then the young man's attention was drawn to unusual sounds that were coming from somewhere nearby. Stopping, Shutra asked what that sound was. Karma asked them to wait. She would check everything. The satyr girl rushed towards the suspicious sounds with the speed of the wind. Stopping at the edge of the cliff, she looked down into the mountain gorge. What she saw shocked her, and she whispered in confusion that this couldn't be. A herd of Cassias chased a lone centaur. Karma asked in surprise how the Cassias were able to find them. Huge wolf-like monsters, their predatory eyes blazing, chased the young centaur. The young inhabitant of the plains, Enger, ran with the last of his strength, a little more, and the monsters would tear him apart. The leader of the Cassia pack jumped up and rushed at the centaur with a terrible growl. The young man screamed in horror. He was no longer able to run away from the monsters. But at that moment the elven dragon butted the monster, throwing it away from the frightened centaur. The monster, thrown back by Felicia's subject, fell to the ground with a crash. The centaur looked in surprise at the clawed, powerful paws of his savior. Between the confused plains dweller and the herd of Cassia stood Prince Shutra, riding on an elven dragon. Looking at the monsters, the young man said that it seemed they had decided to greet them ahead of time. But in fact it doesn't matter. The glove of the stone dragon Enkidu the Shaker appeared on the prince's hand. Prince Shutra Ignis smiled. He himself was eager to fight the monsters. The young man cheerfully told the Cassias to let the mongrels attack him. The surprised centaur asked the guy who he was, if he was a prince. The largest monster, the leader of this flock of Cassias, stepped forward. The monster opened its fanged mouth and growled at the 9th demon prince. The leader of the pack pushed off the ground and his bloodshot eyes flashing, rushed at the fragile prince. All this made the young man very happy. He answered the centaur that he really was a prince, and asked if that meant he was in charge here. At this time, A clatter of feet was heard behind them. A worried Karma asked if everything was all right with His Highness. Karak grumbled that he couldn't rush forward like that. But Shutra Ignis replied that everything was fine, and suggested that everyone just watch. To everyone's surprise, the youngest prince rose up in the saddle, standing on the dragon's back. He pushed off from the saddle and flew towards the huge leader of the Cassia flock. The young man decided to test the martial art of the beast god, which he had been practicing all this time. With his right hand in Enkidu's glove ready for battle, the player eagerly awaited the enemy's approach. And then, right in front of him, the gaping, roaring mouth of a monster appeared. Shutra clenched his fist, concentrating the furious power of his aura in it. This technique in hand-to-hand combat of the beast was called an explosive fist, and the prince struck the enemy with it. Karak and Karma watched with bated breath as their young master bravely rushed into battle. The leader of the Cassias died on the spot from the blow received from the explosive fist, flying into pieces. Prince Shutra stood over the bloody corpse of the monster and could not believe his eyes. The rest of the pack members were in no hurry to attack the young man, and looked questioningly at the remains of their leader. Suddenly the monsters barked like dogs and ran away. The prince was surprised that no one seemed to want to fight anymore. The player realized that the shaker had strengthened his aura, and it was much more destructive than he expected. He smiled, seeming to be able to hit at almost Caitlin's power level. Karma was delighted. This is amazing. To cut off Cassius's head with one blow. His Highness is incredible. The centaur introduced himself. He was Swift Wind, a scout sent to guide them to the centaur settlement on the Anger Plains. In the pool of blood of the slain prince, Cassius, the purple aura of the stone dragon Enkidu glowed. At last the small company of travelers arrived at the centaur settlement on the Plains of Anger. These plains are home to 4 centaur tribes: Furious Wind, Rain, Heavy Night, and Raging Flame. Among them, the Raging Flame tribe is the most powerful. Its leader is also the supreme leader, uniting all the tribes. The chieftain greeted the guests, announcing that he was Killing Gaze, the supreme leader of the centaurs. Anyone who has played the Demon Knight saga will know this name, as encountering him is inevitable. When Ju played Zephyr, the centaur leader, Murderous Gaze, was not an ally, but an enemy. The prince introduced himself, saying that he was Shutra, and Karak whispered that the chieftain really did have a deadly look. The leader of the centaurs of the plains, Enger, looked closely at the younger demon prince. Shutra Ignis said he would like to hear the chief's assessment of the current situation. A murderous look invited the distinguished guest to enter his tent. Pointing to a map of the plains, the high chieftain centaur said, "Frankly, the situation is not the best. The Cassia flock, which should have been far north at this time, descended south much earlier than usual this year. Scouts are currently monitoring the area, although some speculate that part of the Cassia herd may have simply lost its way. In 3 days, warriors from all 4 tribes will gather here, and together they will be able to destroy the beasts wherever they are." In the game, Killing Gaze was an unrecruitable character and could not be allied with, but perhaps this time things will be different. Shutra said that everything was clear to him, which meant he needed to wait for the army. But the leader continued to look questioningly at the prince. Finally, the centaur asked if it was true that Shutra had crushed Cassia's skull with one blow. The young man smiled and confirmed that it was true. He really hoped that Killing Gaze could become his ally. Shutra exclaimed that he could demonstrate this to the high chief later if he wanted. The centaur nodded his head affirmatively, he thought. Something about this boy made him wary. When he said goodbye to the 9th prince, he said that he would look forward to the demonstration. The centaurs in the village whispered to each other, pointing at Shutra and saying that he was the 9th prince. The villagers said to each other, pointing to the young man, that this was the same one who had crushed Cassia's skull with one blow. Karak, looking around restlessly, said to the ruler, "He had gained popularity here too." The prince laughed. Smiling, he explained to the orc that it was all thanks to his innate charm and virtue. Finally, they came to the large yurt that had been allocated for the prince. Karak urged his highness to go and rest. A starry night descended on the plains of Anger, and the yurt was warm and at the same time cool. The prince stretched out on a comfortable bed and fell into a sweet sleep after a long day of travel. The young man snored loudly as his tent filled with an unusual greenish light. Suddenly the player opened his eyes and felt that there was someone else in the yurt besides him. Suddenly the glove of the stone dragon Enkidu the Shaker appeared on the young man's right hand. The prince was shocked that the shaker had landed on his hand on its own. It certainly hadn't summoned the glove. He heard someone calling his name, the 9th Prince Shutru Ignos. Turning towards the voice, the young man saw a girl. It was from her that the strange greenish light emanated. The night visitor, dressed in green clothes, told the prince that she really needed his help. Having overcome his surprise, the player asked the girl who she was. The girl replied that she was a fragment of Einkel's observation, with petals and flowers swirling around her. It seemed that all her clothes and jewelry were made from various plants. Standing in front of the ninth prince's pastel, the girl added that she was Green Wind. And then he remembered he had come across this name earlier in the game when he played as Zephyr. The Green Wind is one of the nature spirits worshipped by centaurs and satyrs. According to the knight's saga scenario, thanks to the power of the Green Wind, the plains of Anger flourished. Suddenly the young man saw that they, together with the spirit of nature, had moved to a flowering plain. A temple appeared behind the green girl. She said that this place was her home. Here in this temple is a fragment of its creator, the observer Einkel. And then Ju began to remember the Einkel fragment that was also in the game earlier. Observer Einkel was one of the 6 ancient dragons of this world. Ancient dragons are divine creatures that players could never encounter in the Knight's saga. The young man had just recently received Enkidu's shaker, and now he might meet the observer Einkel. Too many coincidences. The girl told the prince that they had no time. Monsters from the north were approaching her house. They want to steal the greenery of the Anger Plains. They will destroy her home and consume her spirit. Green Wind said that only Shutra could protect this place. The young man was confused, but his level was not high enough. The interlocutor reminded him that he already possessed the power of the stone dragon Enkidu. The girl told him not to worry, the Einkel fragment would grant him great power. She added that he must first show this divine sign to her children. Prince Shutra Ignis found himself back in his yurt, holding a small, green glowing object in his hand. He remembered Green Wind's words. When her children saw this, they would definitely help the prince. The murderous gaze was surprised by what Shutra was suddenly saying, why Green Wind was in danger. The prince explained that there was a small temple to the northeast, and if Green Wind was telling the truth, the Cassia would soon attack it. The young man insisted that they must move out immediately, but the supreme leader of the centaurs had his doubts. Then Shutra took out the object received from the spirit of nature and showed it to the surprised chief. The murderous gaze instantly realized that the prince was holding the divine relic of the Green Wind. The supreme leader's eyes flashed and he immediately asked the demon prince what to do. As soon as the sun rose, the entire army of centaurs was on its feet and preparing for battle. Having lined up in columns, the warriors of the strongest tribe moved towards the temple of the Green Wind. All of them were well armed and determined to give a decisive rebuff to the enemy. Shutra and Karak rode in the front ranks of the army on their elven dragons. The young man opened his game minimap to figure out where the temple his night visitor had spoken of was. Finally he saw it, and here it was, the very same magical temple of the Green Wind. If it weren't for the minimap, Ju would never have found it. It's so deep in the wilderness. One of the warriors drew the chief's attention to a huge flock of very large cassias. But how did the cassias find out where the main temple of the Green Wind was located? The young man realized that something was definitely wrong here. Someone was directing these monsters. The murderous look said that there were more enemies than he expected, and asked the prince if he had a plan. Green Wind told him to draw power from the ankle fragment. There must be something inside the temple. Shutra told the high chief that he was going to the temple and ordered him not to let the enemy come close. The ninth prince commanded Karak and Karma to follow him. The murderous gaze commanded his warriors not to let any of the enemies near the temple. The supreme leader of the centaurs and commander of their army ordered everyone to prepare for battle. The armed centaurs rushed forward against the enemies approaching their temple. The archers knocked their arrows and took aim at the toothy monsters rushing towards them. A hail of well-aimed arrows fell upon the flock of cassias. Many of them were killed or seriously wounded. With their swords drawn, the centaurs bravely charged into the hordes of their worst enemies. The sharp swords and strong hooves of the centaurs stopped the rapid advance of the cassias. Meanwhile, Prince Shutra and his companions headed towards the Green Wind Temple. Karak asked the Lord if he understood correctly that he simply needed to get to the temple. Shutra confirmed that he absolutely had to get to the ancient centaur sanctuary. The orc said that in that case they would clear the way, no matter what the cost. Karak swung his battle axe and, roaring furiously, rushed at the monsters. The monsters fell one after another under the blows of the powerful orc's heavy axe. Fast Karma was also not far behind, dealing precise fatal blows to the toothy cassias. The young man was pleased. He shouted to his companions that they were great and galloped off to the temple. They were almost there, but enemies continued to block their path to Green Wind's house. And then the prince saw that a huge club was about to fall right on him. The giant horned monster struck the elven dragon Shutra with a club. The dragon fell from the blow, throwing off its young royal rider. A huge monster resembling a satyr bared its sharp teeth and growled at the prince. A little more, and this goat-legged creature could trample the young man who fell to the ground. The player cursed. He had placed too much trust in his companions and had let his guard down. And then his brave Karak stood between the evil satyr and Prince Shutra. He asked the prince if he was okay. the young man saw that the orc was already wounded. Turning slightly, Karak told His Highness to get up. It was still too early to rest. A huge horned enemy rushed at the brave orc with a growl. Swinging a heavy club, the bloodthirsty ogre struck at Karak, but Prince Shutra's companion steadfastly withstood the blows, blocking them with his battle axe. The young man asked Karak what was wrong. He looked so cool in his new armor. Was he really out of breath already? The player took a blade from his inventory, stuck it into the ground, and shouted the spell under the king's banner. At that very moment, a powerful stream of mana was directed towards Karak. He felt incredible power and rushed forward. Shutra commanded his companions that from that moment on, they would go on the offensive. The giant was taken aback by his opponent's sudden burst of power and his persistent and painful attacks. He looked questioningly at Karak, who, despite his smaller size, had inflicted several wounds on the enemy. The orc took aim, and jumping high, inflicted a noticeable wound on his enemy with his axe. Without giving him time to come to his senses, Karak rushed at the giant again with a battle cry. Before he could counterattack, the orc struck the enemy again, inflicting another wound. A stream of blood gushed from the giant's fanged mouth. He staggered and began to fall. Karak jumped up and dealt another crushing blow to the wounded enemy. The giant waved his arms helplessly and fell to the ground with a crash. The fall of the enemy's huge body raised clouds of dust, and for several seconds it was difficult to see anything. Karak shouted to the prince to hurry to the temple, and left the rest to him. The young man ran as fast as he could to the Green Wind Temple, where a mysterious artifact of an ancient dragon awaited him. The prince threw open the doors of the sanctuary and ran inside. That same greenish light and rustling of leaves was everywhere. Suddenly he heard the voice of the spirit of nature. The green wind urged him on. She said that Enkidu's artifact would guide him, and at that very second a dragon glove appeared on the young man's hand. The player saw that the energy from Enkidu's glove was directed into the depths of the temple. Without thinking, Ju followed the flow of green energy. He knew the enemies were already very close. In the very center of the sanctuary, the ninth prince saw a huge and very ancient tree, the crown of which reached into the sky. The tree glowed, emitting life-giving magic. It seemed that this was where the green wind drew its energy. Suddenly the young man saw that something was happening to the magic tree. Its gnarled branches were stretching towards Shutra. The ninth prince stared at the tree with all his eyes and could not move. And then he saw that the branches were intertwined into a huge hand, and this hand was holding out some object to Shutra. The young man looked at the wooden hand extended to him and could not believe it. This object was very familiar to him. The tree was holding out a dragon's heart to him. The source of mana that every dragon possesses is its heart. So that's what this Einkel fragment is. Green Wind said that the Enger Plains had maintained peace for a very long time thanks to the magic of the Observer Einkel. This temple is the center of that magic, born from the fragment of Einkel. If this place is destroyed, the world on the plains will collapse. The girl said that the prince must awaken the ancient magic of Einkel, which remained in this temple, and prevent this. The supreme leader of the centaurs shouted, "Do not retreat. We cannot allow the enemies into the temple." Meanwhile, a bloody battle was taking place on the approaches to the temple. Karak was fighting with huge monsters. The clever Karma slit the throats of numerous Cassias trying to break into the temple. Ju looked at the powerful artifact that the wooden hand was holding out to him in confusion, and the girl begged the ninth prince to protect the plains of Enger and her children with the magic that Enkel left behind. Having made up his mind, the boy placed his hand on the ancient dragon's heart that was extended to him. He immediately felt a powerful flow of mana that flowed like a raging river and almost knocked him off his feet. The young man heard a strange noise, raised his head and was stunned. He didn't expect to see such a thing. Against the backdrop of the starry sky, the beautiful ancient Einkel lay before him, looking tenderly at the prince. Shutra was stunned. Could it really be that Observer Einkel was standing in front of him? The dragon's eyes and lush fur glowed with a life-giving green light, and Einkel told the prince to take her heart. Shutra stood amidst the flow of Einkel's mana, and could not take his eyes off the amazingly powerful and beautiful patroness of these places. And then everyone saw that a bright green glow appeared above the Green Wind Temple. A powerful green stream rushed into the sky, and the centaurs and their enemies froze for a few seconds. All the plains were illuminated by the green light of life-giving magic, and the enemies hissed angrily. Karak thought with concern about the prince, whether it was really he who did this. Suddenly, amazing plants began to appear from the ground everywhere, growing before our eyes. The stunned centaurs and their enemies stared with wide eyes at this unprecedented miracle. Soon the plants formed into tree-like giant warriors. The Cassia and their allies were attacked by the formidable warlike guardians of these places, created by ancient magic. The eyes of the tree warriors burned with the green fire of the magic of the observer Einkel. The frightened monsters looked at the advancing guards in confusion. Their fangs and clubs were useless against them. The Cassias, with their tails between their legs, darted between the living trees, while their allies cautiously retreated. And then one of the monstrous satyrs rushed with an axe at the ancient guardians of the plains. And in that very second he was cut in half. But the monsters of the north had no intention of retreating. Having come to their senses, they rushed at new enemies. The green wind told the prince that he had succeeded. The ancient magic of Einkel had awakened. She thanked the ninth prince. Thanks to him, the Enger Plains would remain peaceful. And then Greenwind saw that the young man did not remove his hand from the dragon's heart. Moreover, Einkel's mana passes into the ninth prince. The girl was horrified at what he was doing. Greenwind, her mouth slightly open in surprise, looked at Prince Shutra Ignus. Finally, she asked the savior of the plains why Ankiel's mana was filling him. The spirit of nature whispered in fear. Was the prince really trying to absorb Ankiel's power? As mana filled Prince Shutra, bloody wounds began to appear on his body. The girl shouted at him to stop this immediately. If he continued, his body would not withstand it. Suddenly, a system message appeared, the game notifying Ju that his level had increased. As the player's level increased, the wounds on his body began to heal. Soon there was no trace left of the bloody wounds. The sharp pain disappeared, and Shutra's body absorbed new mana. Green Wind looked at the young man questioningly. She couldn't believe that his wounds were healing. The game once again informed Ju that his level had increased again, increasing his other stats as well. He again heard the voice of the golden-haired girl with different eyes, repeating that the prince must conquer. Shutra must subjugate the artifact and bring it to its knees with his power. Even if there was only a remnant of an ancient dragon in front of him, he would fall prostrate before the prince. She extended her hand, on which burned the heart of the great observer Einkel, and suddenly the young man felt the green heart of the dragon Einkel beating in his chest. The magical tree burst into a bright green light, as if its creator had been reborn. The leaves rustled merrily, waving their branches. The great tree greeted the owner of Einkel's heart. The young man stood leaning on his knees. So much had happened in the temple, he needed to come to his senses. The green mana of the ancient dragon flowed around him. Now he needed to figure out what to do with it. And then he heard that he, the Knight of Conquest, had received a new passive skill, Dragon Body. Game notifications appeared one after another. In addition to the dragon's body, the player received immunity to all poisons. Ju was already at level 17, and he had acquired another property. He became Dragonborn. This is the name given to creatures in which the dragon gene has awakened, and who can wield dragon magic. Despite being a draconian Asura hybrid, Zephyr's recessive heritage allowed him to awaken the dragon gene. Green Wind said that the prince has acquired the spirit and body of a dragon. She feels the power of the observer Einkel in him. But she is not disappointed, because this is a power that no one could use. It was sealed and remained dormant for 1,000 years. The spirit of nature addressed the successor of the observer Einkel, saying that now she had only one wish. She begged for protection of the Enger Plains and her children from a powerful new enemy. The ninth prince smiled and assured Greenwind that he would definitely protect the plains and her children. And in front of the temple the battle was still going on. Most of the Cassian army and their allies were destroyed by the tree warriors. Suddenly, the magical guards of Ankiel heard a powerful roar. A very strong enemy appeared. Swinging his massive axe, he cut one of the plains tree warriors in half. This monster was many times larger and stronger than all of the Cassia's allies. It flashed bloody eyes and growled menacingly. At this time the prince came out of the temple, so there can be no doubt who commands the Cassius. It is definitely him. The player realized that now was the time to intervene in the battle, and he ran forward. Finding Carrick on the battlefield, the prince turned to his faithful knight, saying that he had business with the orc. The commander of the army, Cassius, was destroying the tree guards and killing the centaurs. He was incredibly angry that his army was destroyed and the temple was not captured, and he took out his rage on everyone. Suddenly the monster frowned angrily. Someone dared to attack this furious giant. Ju, summoning the glove of the stone dragon Enkidu, struck the monster in the chest with all his might. The enraged monster threw the prince back, hitting him with a huge fist. The young man thought that for such an appearance the monster was surprisingly agile. The monster rushed in pursuit of the impudent little fellow who dared to attack him. The young man once again decided to combine the power of the Shaker and the hand-to-hand combat art of the beast god, and see if the monster could block it. The prince used his explosive fist and delivered another blow to the monster's stomach. The monster became even more angry, but was unharmed. But the prince's hand was shaking and he clenched his teeth. What kind of skin does this enemy have? Is it really so thick that it's impossible to pierce it? and the huge monster continued to pursue the ninth prince, striking blow after blow. This opponent turned out to be tougher than Ju expected. Even the explosive fist had no effect on him. And then the player remembered the recently acquired skills. Enkidu's aura flared around him. Now he would show the monster something new. Ju summoned the dragon's blood, and the game announced that the Dragonborn's unique skill had been activated. At that very moment, Enkidu's glove sparked, and the Shaker released part of his true power. Clenching his fist, the young man decided that he would bet everything on this attack. If he lost, he could die. Brandishing a terrifying axe, the monster ran towards the small, fragile ninth demon prince. Closing his eyes, Prince Shutra quietly said that now it was Karak's turn to strike. The player gave the order to summon the knights, and at that very moment Karak, flying up from behind, struck the monster with an axe and cut off its horn. This attack came as a complete surprise to the monster. It didn't even have time to react. He growled angrily, the severed horn causing him great pain. The monster shook with rage. At this time, the ninth prince ran up to the enemy and shouted for the monster to prepare for death. The monster turned to the prince again. He had already forgotten about this annoying little one. But he shouted that this time everything would be completely different, and struck with his fist. The glove of the stone dragon Enkidu sparkled with dragon mana. This was the secret art of the Shaker. This time the prince's attack was successful. The giant's body was pierced through. Ju called this move a giant piston. The army of centaurs watched this unusual battle, and the amazing victory of the ninth prince with amazement. The murderous gaze was amazed at how this boy was able to cope with such a giant. But most of all, the faithful orc Karak was worried about his young master. The defeated monster fell to the ground with a crash, raising clouds of dust and a hail of stones. The game informed the young man that, thanks to a successful battle, his level had increased. System information messages flashed. The player defeated the Drake Ogre boss Mustafa. Now Prince Shutra received the title of Ogre Drake Slayer, and the purple mana of Enkidu flowed over the body of the defeated enemy. The player thoughtfully asked how much aura he had used. If it weren't for the new level, he probably would have collapsed without strength. To use the ultimate built into a weapon, a special movement control skill is required. But Ju doesn't have it yet. Karak informed the prince that the remaining monsters were running away after the big guy fell. But the supreme leader of the centaurs was not going to let his sworn enemies go so easily. He ordered the soldiers to chase the Cassius. If they were allowed to escape, they would return to attack again. The commander ordered that none of the northern monsters be allowed to escape. They all must be killed. By nightfall, the entire area near the Green Wind Temple was strewn with enemy corpses. Bonfires were burning, food was being prepared, alcoholic drinks were flowing like a river, and the centaurs were celebrating their victory. Happy Karma danced energetically in front of the laughing Karak. Prince Shutra, unnoticed by the others, returned to the temple and approached the magic tree. Green Wind was surprised. He seemed to be having a great time, so she brought him to her. The prince said that he wanted to ask the Green Wind a few questions, and the girl agreed to answer, since he had fulfilled her request. But first, Green Wind asked to free her. The prince did not understand what to free her from. The girl explained that the prince had absorbed Einkel's mana, and it, born from Einkel's magic, was now connected to him. The young man understood what was going on, and asked to give him a minute. Green Wind closed her eyes and waited for release. A few minutes passed. The spirit of nature opened her eyes and looked questioningly at the ninth prince. He was very embarrassed, and asked the Green Wind in confusion how he could do this. The girl was indignant. He is a temporary ruler, but as if he were eternal. Does he seriously not know how to do this? Of course, the prince doesn't know this. He wasn't taught this, the spirit asked. Then why does he act as if he was taught? He asked the spirit to calm down. He needed to think about her current state. Green Wind replied that she was his, therefore she was subordinate to him, the ninth Prince Shutra. But Ju meant something completely different. Was she comfortable? Did she feel any changes? The spirit answered that none. However, if she were to disappear, the Anger Planes would lose their life force, for she is the living embodiment of Einkel's life magic. The young man wondered what he should do to preserve his spirit and not destroy the planes. He asked if she could stay here on the Anger Planes instead of leaving with him. There is no need for the Green Wind to go with him now. The face of the spirit of nature suddenly became sad. She asked if the owner was really leaving her. The prince was surprised. Did she want to go with him? The spirit was indignant. He is her master. Naturally, she will accompany him. And then it dawned on the player that he seemed to have accidentally made a contract with the spirit of nature. Shutra clarified. She just said that she was the embodiment of the great spell over the Anger Planes. Could the Green Wind create someone in its place to maintain the magic of life on the plains? The girl replied, "It will take some time, but it is possible," Ju exclaimed. "Great. Then she can go with him." But then the spirit will not be able to help him for some time. She will have to leave most of her power on the plains of anger. The prince reassured her. It was okay. He knew that making a contract with such a spirit was a wonderful opportunity. And now the young man still wanted to ask the Green Wind his questions. He was very interested in how and when Einkel, one of the ancient divine dragons, died. This question left Green Wind stumped. She looked at her master in surprise. She is just a fragment. Like a spirit reborn by nature, she does not have many of Einkel's memories. However, Green Wind remembers something. 1,000 years ago, Einkel was killed. The girl didn't remember who the killer was, but she was sure it wasn't another ancient dragon. Ju wondered who could possibly kill the ancient dragon, a creature rumored to possess godlike powers. The spirit asked the master to now speak to her informally. She felt uncomfortable when the master addressed her formally. The prince asked how she knew the prince had become Ankiel's successor. Did that mean he could contain the power of the ancient dragon? The spirit thought, it's difficult, but the prince can succeed. He already has the power of Einkel, the observer of polarity, and the great Enkidu, who opposes her. If he can find a balance between these powers, he might be able to gain the powers of other ancient dragons. Ju was stunned. Was this really possible? Apparently this is the so-called plot armor of the main character. The last question then remained, did Green Wind know anything about his new power? The spirit sighed, as she had already said. She did not retain all of Ankiel's memories, so her knowledge unfortunately is incomplete, and she cannot help her master. Suddenly, Green Wind flared up brightly, as if someone had entered her. Shielding his eyes from the incredibly bright light, the young man asked in confusion what was happening. The flash faded, and Green Wind spoke with a different voice to the Knight of Conquest, born under the fate of kings. Ju listened in surprise. He had already heard this voice when Einkel herself appeared to him. The dragon said that he must conquer and rule all that exists, such is the power of the king. And he, the 9th demon prince Shutra Ignis, will possess this power. The sun rose over the green plains of Anger, and a new day began. Prince Shutra lay on the floor of the Green Wind Temple in front of a huge magical tree. Opening one eye, the young man tried to understand where he was and what had happened to him yesterday. He clearly remembered talking to Green Wind, but what happened next and why he lost consciousness was a question. The spirit flew up to the ruler, seeing that he had woken up and was sitting on the floor of the sanctuary. She said that for some reason, Ankiel's consciousness, which remained within her, manifested itself last night, which is probably why the prince lost consciousness. Now he clearly remembered how he had spoken to Ankiel through the spirit of the Green Wind. She spoke of the king's strength and the Knight of Conquest, so Ankiel already knew of his strength. Green Wind told the lord that she had to tell him something that she had not mentioned yesterday. A detailed map of the Anger Plains appeared before Prince Shutra, showing all the settlements, mountains, and forests. The spirit explained that in the very north of the Anger Plains there is one of the relics of the observer Einkel. Like the shaker wielded by the prince, it is an artifact imbued with the power of an ancient dragon, and it contains the Shield of Life. Einkel gave the Shield of Life to the bravest and fairest centaur, who led his people against the enemies from the north, and won without receiving a single wound. But he did not take the shield to bed, and one night, while sharing a bed with a woman sent by his enemies, he was stabbed to death. The shield was given to Einkel herself, so no one else could use it. It was buried with the warrior in a tomb in the north. Centuries passed, and the Shield of Life became a legend. The centaurs named it after the warrior himself. Among the centaurs, this artifact is known as the White Suri. Concluding her story, Green Wind said that this was the new name for the magic shield. Ju couldn't believe it. White Suri. This is the legendary artifact that only appears in the prequel of the Knight Saga. Even veterans of the game like Ju couldn't find it. It's the best shield of all. It turns out it's an artifact of an ancient dragon. The player asked where this tomb was. The spirit replied that if they went to the very north of the Anger Plains, she could find it. But first she must create a replacement for herself. She will begin as soon as she and the master finish talking. Ju asked how long it would take to create another spirit. She replied it should take about 2 days. Smiling, the prince said, "That means they can set out in 2 days. Although it's far, it's entirely possible to overcome it. Whatever happens, they have to go there. If they find White Suri, everything will become much easier." Prince Shutra left the temple and hurried back to the Centaur military camp. He may head north under the pretext of hunting for the remaining Cassias. The problem is that the Demon King's castle has probably already detected the protective spell activated in the temple. They will probably send a specialist to inspect the ruins soon. If the report comes in today, it will arrive within a week. The prince decided it was best to leave before they arrived, and then the High Chief said that someone from the Demon King's castle had arrived. Shutra jumped in surprise, wondering why they reacted so quickly. He remembered the Green Wind Temple, where the spirit of nature was currently preparing a replacement to go with the prince. The ninth prince, along with Karak, went to meet the messenger from the Demon King's castle. Felicia Dumbledore asked Shutra what was wrong with his face. It looked like he had seen a ghost. The young man asked Felicia in surprise what she was doing here. He didn't expect to see her here. The sister said that it was enough chatting, and suggested that we at least say hello first. Felicia was accompanied by an unfamiliar girl who bowed and said that it was an honor for her to meet the ninth prince. The girl introduced herself. Her name is Daphne. She is the daughter of Echo, the fifth concubine of the Demon King. Ju tensed up. This name was also familiar to him from the game, he remembered. Daphne, a druid, born of a dryad. She is one of 3 half-sisters who must be made allies at any cost. Felicia said that Daphne was an exceptional druid, and would be useful for the mission since the guardian spirit of the Anger Plains was involved. Prince Shutra didn't expect to meet Daphne here. He needed to make a good impression on her. But Felicia was going to the Gishkov Mountains to study the anvil that produces thunder. The elf quietly replied that Shutra had completed his task too quickly. He had been attracting attention lately. Suppressing Cassia is not difficult. But what makes all the difference is that Shutra managed to do it in 2 days. Usually it takes at least 2 weeks. And because so many unusual things happened during the mission, everyone was in shock. If someone else had come, Shutra would probably have already been interrogated and surveillance would have begun. The prince understood. So that's why she came instead of them. Felicia answered sheepishly. Well, not only because of that, she was curious about the magic of this temple and why the Cassias began to behave differently. He thanked his sister for her concern. Beneath her cold exterior lay a surprisingly warm soul. To change the subject, Felicia asked Shutra what his plans were now. He replied that he was going to explore the northern region to see if there were any Cassias left there. The murderous look said that he would go with the prince. It was his duty. How could the leader of the tribe not go himself? The ninth prince agreed. It was logical. Suddenly Felicia said that she would also go with them. This decision surprised the young man, but the princess said that it was better to study living Cassias than dead ones. Ju cursed silently. Searching for the remaining Cassias was supposed to be just an excuse. It seemed like things were going to be more complicated. The attentive Karak realized that the prince was dissatisfied, even though he had said that the more people, the better. A few days later, the detachment crossed the Anger Plains and approached their northernmost part. Here a large flock of evil Cassias awaited them. The leader of the monsters growled threateningly. The seasoned warriors of the Killing Gaze prepared for battle with their ancient enemies. Karak grinned. He knew that they would definitely meet these creatures again. His instincts did not deceive him. The Cassi surrounded the squad. Prince Shutra took out Enkidu's glove. This battle promised to be very difficult.